Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. My name is Daniel, and there was nothing extraordinary about my childhood. I spent my early years in a quiet town in northern Oregon, where life moved at an unhurried pace. My father worked as an auto mechanic, and my mother taught elementary school. They were dedicated to their professions, and instilled in me early on that if I wanted to achieve something in life, I would need to work hard for it. I loved listening to stories about people who started with nothing and became successful business leaders. These stories always motivated me. I wanted to be like them, someone capable of turning dreams into reality. In school, I was the type of student who truly applied himself. I wasn't the brightest, but my determination never let me give up, even when my classmates thought I was dreaming too big. I remained confident that I could accomplish anything I imagined. I focused my energy on studying and took advantage of every opportunity that came my way. After graduating high school, I knew I needed to leave my hometown to find something greater. My father supported me, but my mother worried about the challenges I would face. Despite her concerns, I was determined to continue and seek what the world had to offer. I moved to Seattle and started working at a tech company. The first few months were extremely challenging, and I constantly had to prove my worth. But gradually, with effort and dedication, I climbed the ranks. Eventually, I reached a point where I could fulfill my dream of starting my own business. However, I had no idea that success and money would bring unexpected challenges, situations that would change my life in ways I wasn't prepared for. During the early years of my company, I worked tirelessly, spending days and nights focused on making everything function optimally. Watching the business grow was an indescribable feeling, almost like controlling a dream becoming reality. But it didn't take long for me to realize that success came with a high price. I gradually noticed that many people around me were more interested in what I could offer than in who I really was. They were people looking to take advantage of my position, and this began to weigh on me. A specific case was that of a college acquaintance who reappeared when my company was doing well. He approached me with partnership and collaboration proposals. At first, I thought he was genuine, but over time, it became clear that he only wanted a slice of my success. The situation became so complicated that I had to cut ties with him. This experience made me more cautious with people. Every time I met someone new, whether for friendship or professional contact, I questioned whether that person's intentions were sincere or opportunistic. This made me close myself off a bit more, avoiding trusting too easily. Nevertheless, my company continued to prosper. I hired more employees, opened new branches, and became a recognized name in the industry. But as I advanced, I realized that something essential seemed to be slipping away. It was as if, while building my empire, I was also erecting barriers around myself. Loneliness became an unexpected price of success. As the years passed, the triumph I had so desired began to bring an unexpected burden, a loneliness that grew with each achievement. My business flourished, but my personal life was in ruins. Serious relationships were an insurmountable challenge because the fear of getting deeply involved paralyzed me. Despite being surrounded by incredible women, some stunning, others brilliant and stimulating, I simply couldn't allow myself to create a deeper bond. There was always the fear of being betrayed or hurt, which made me find excuses to avoid any commitment. On the outside, I was the successful businessman constantly accompanied by someone. But inside, I was always alone. I preferred experiencing fleeting connections rather than facing the vulnerability necessary for something lasting. Each new woman who appeared seemed to promise to fill the void, but in the end, only widened the space within me. My life had transformed into a sequence of brief encounters and inevitable goodbyes, never reaching a sense of stability. I knew something needed to change, but I had no idea how to begin. The material success I accumulated didn't fill the emotional abyss I carried, and without realizing it, this feeling of emptiness was about to grow even more. Over time, the loneliness began to weigh on me unbearably. Friends who were already established in marriages or with well-organized routines insisted that I needed to find someone to give meaning to my life. After hearing this advice too many times, I began to wonder if they might be right. One evening, I decided to distract myself and went to a party at a nightclub. The place was packed, and the music pulsed loudly. It was there that I met Vanessa. She danced with a naturalness that immediately caught my attention. Her straight, light brown hair fell softly on her shoulders, while her green eyes radiated a special gleam every time she smiled. Her athletic build was enhanced by a blue dress that elegantly accentuated her curves. Vanessa was magnetic and stood out in the crowd. Her confident posture and assured gaze made it clear that she knew how to command the scene. When our eyes met, I was struck by an immediate attraction. To me, initially, she seemed just another woman on that night full of possibilities. I soon realized something different. She was observing me in a peculiar way, with a gaze that carried something deeper. It wasn't simple curiosity. There was a tangible interest. Vanessa made the first move, approaching me while I was just trying to enjoy the night. Her manner disarmed me. Her perfume was striking, and the unpretentious way she moved intrigued me. Unlike many who melted upon discovering who I was, she seemed immune to my status. In a direct tone, she asked why I was watching her. I let out a light laugh, responding that I was just appreciating the scene. She smiled, and this opened space for a conversation that flowed naturally. I discovered she was as interested in getting to know me as I was in unraveling who she was. When the party was ending, I invited her to come to my place. Her response, however, caught me off guard. "No, thank you," she said with a tranquil smile. This refusal surprised me, and curiously, increased my fascination with her even more. Vanessa didn't leave immediately. Instead, we exchanged numbers. With a sparkle in her eyes, she just commented, "Let's see where this goes." It was then that I realized she had established a different game, and I, for the first time in a long time, felt the desire to play. Although Vanessa had declined the invitation that first night, the simple gesture of giving me her number and the way she displayed such marked independence only increased my curiosity. I returned home with my head full of thoughts about her. Vanessa wasn't like any other woman I had ever met. Even without knowing what the future held, one thing was clear to me. I wanted to get to know her better. A few weeks later, Vanessa called me, and we arranged to meet at a bar. The night was relaxed and pleasant. We talked for hours, laughed unhurriedly, and the chemistry between us seemed natural. At the end of the date, she accepted the invitation to a more private place, which excited me. When we arrived at my apartment, a spacious and carefully decorated place, I noticed that Vanessa wasn't impressed. She was serene, as if already accustomed to such environments. Her blend of elegance and sensuality was irresistible, and the confidence she exuded sparked my curiosity even more. But what truly intrigued me was the mystery that inhabited her eyes, something that seemed to hide more than she let on. That first night was light, but the enigma in Vanessa's gaze wouldn't leave my mind. Soon we began to see each other more frequently, and the connection between us grew. We dined in sophisticated restaurants, and she always demonstrated a secure and relaxed posture. The more time we spent together, the more I wanted to understand her story. However, every time I tried to deepen the subject, Vanessa skillfully diverted the conversation. All she revealed was that she came from a simple family and worked as an investment consultant. On the other hand, I felt comfortable opening up more with her. I shared pieces of my journey, the humble origins, the battles I faced, and how I achieved success. Vanessa listened with genuine attention, her eyes shining as if absorbing every word. Even without knowing much about her past, I perceived a real connection between us. She seemed to truly care, which encouraged me to continue sharing more of myself. Still, the mystery surrounding her only increased my fascination. As time passed, our relationship became more intense. I trusted her more and more, something that was never easy for me, considering how difficult it had always been for me to open up. But Vanessa had a special way of making me feel at ease, always finding the right words to reassure me. Without realizing it, our meetings became daily, and what we had started to seem natural and meaningful. I decided I was ready to advance in our relationship, so I resolved to ask Vanessa to be my girlfriend. Although my personality was more reserved, I never ceased to be a romantic. Having something more serious with Vanessa seemed the right path, and I wanted to demonstrate how much she meant to me. Nervous but hopeful, I prepared for the moment. When I finally spoke, I was direct and sincere, making my feelings and intentions clear. My expectation was that she would understand the seriousness of what I was saying and be ready to embark on this new stage by my side. To my joy, Vanessa accepted my proposal, and the happiness of this new phase was evident for both of us. I decided it was time to introduce Vanessa to my friends. Everything seemed to be going well until, after the meeting, I received a message from Tyler asking to talk to me privately. We arranged to meet at my house when I would be alone. When he arrived, Tyler made me uncomfortable with what he said. He claimed that he felt there was something off about Vanessa, although he couldn't identify exactly what it was. I felt a wave of anger. After years of my friends insisting that I find someone, now they were questioning my choice. It seemed like pure jealousy. After all, Vanessa was incredible. I told him this must be in his head, and that I wouldn't listen to unfounded assumptions. Tyler tried to be more conciliatory, suggesting only that I investigate a little more about her. I retorted, saying that if he wanted to maintain our friendship, he should stop with this type of comment. I trusted Vanessa and wouldn't allow his doubts to contaminate my relationship. Tyler sighed, hesitated for an instant, and just responded, "All right." Despite my firmness, his words echoed in my mind. Reluctantly, I began to wonder if there was something I was ignoring. I decided to look for information about her, but found nothing. No social media, no relevant records. This only increased my suspicion. One night while Vanessa was in the shower, I couldn't resist. I opened her purse, looking for anything that might clarify who she really was. I found her identification, and what I saw left me perplexed. Vanessa's real name was actually Victoria. Additionally, she had lied about her age. She claimed to be 32, but in reality, she was 28. For someone like me, naturally distrustful, this was a huge blow. I took photos of her documents and returned everything to its place, making sure nothing appeared out of place. The rest of the night was torment. I remained silent, struggling to act normally. Vanessa noticed something was wrong and insisted on knowing what was happening. But I attributed my change in mood to tiredness. For days, this discovery consumed me, while she continued questioning my distance. Finally, I decided I needed to confront her. I wanted to resolve this, and a part of me that was beginning to fall in love hoped she would have a plausible explanation for everything. That night I sat with her and went straight to the point. I confessed that I had gone through her purse while she was in the shower. I said I knew her real name was Victoria, and that she had lied about her age. I waited for a reaction that would clarify everything, perhaps an apology or a logical explanation. But what came was completely unexpected. She exploded in anger without saying almost anything, quickly gathered her things, and left my house, slamming the door hard. I stood there motionless, not knowing how to react. Part of me thought I had done the right thing by confronting her, but another part deeply regretted it. I had destroyed something that could be special, and now only unanswered questions and a gigantic void remained. Besides feeling alone, I realized I didn't even really know who she was. In the following days, I sent several messages, desperately trying to get some contact. No response. I began to accept that she had decided to leave me, and that our relationship was over. Then finally, a message arrived. She wanted to come to my house to talk. Without thinking twice, I agreed. When Victoria arrived, she was visibly dejected. She sat on the couch, head down, and began to open up. She said she was deeply hurt because I had invaded her privacy and distrusted her. I apologized, acknowledging that my behavior had been exaggerated and that my distrust was a recurring problem. But sincerely, I also made it clear that I needed an explanation. Victoria then revealed what she had hidden. She explained that she used another name out of fear. She said she planned to officially change her identity, but hadn't managed to yet. She told me she was running from someone, a terrifying figure from her past, and that this made her live always alert and scared. Her words hit me like a punch. I felt an enormous weight of guilt for having violated her trust at such a vulnerable moment for her. I promised that she could trust me and that I would do whatever it took to help her. At that moment, she hugged me, and her crying seemed to carry years of pain and fear. All I wanted was to protect her. We decided to move forward, leaving that episode behind. Our relationship seemed to enter a new rhythm, lighter and full of purpose. We were focusing on the present and what we shared. But one day, during a casual conversation with Tyler, I ended up mentioning the story without meaning to. I immediately regretted it. I had promised to keep this secret, but I needed someone I could trust, and Tyler had always been the most reliable friend I had. When he heard the story, Tyler was as surprised as I had been upon discovering the truth. He said Victoria's narrative seemed inconsistent, something I had also begun to notice, even without wanting to admit it. I reported the threats and the violent past she alleged, but Tyler insisted that something didn't fit. For the first time, I agreed with him. Then I remembered the photo I had taken of her documents that night. I showed it to Tyler, who immediately suggested investigating further. He always had a talent for discovering things and volunteered to help. Using the information from the documents, we began to look for answers. Tyler even activated a contact he had in the police to access more detailed records. The truth we found was disconcerting. Victoria had no criminal record or any complaint against her. The most surprising, however, was discovering that she had never been married. The entire story she had told me seemed to crumble in the face of facts. What really made me uncomfortable were some photos we found during the investigation. Victoria appeared alongside various people, including different men, which only increased my suspicions. There seemed to be hidden layers in her life, and this left me restless. Tyler, always cautious, suggested that I distance myself or at least double my attention. He was genuinely concerned with the discoveries and thought there was something more happening. Despite everything, I couldn't convince myself to end things with Victoria. I knew everyone carries secrets, and even with all this, I still liked her. I decided to continue the relationship, but with more prudence. Breaking off completely didn't seem the right choice at that moment, especially because I still had hope in our story. However, things began to unravel. First, constant problems with my car, unexpected failures that led me to spend a fortune on repairs. Then my health began to decline. I started suffering from intense headaches, dizziness, and even frequent nightmares. As if that wasn't enough, even my company began facing inexplicable difficulties. And there was something curious. My symptoms worsened when Victoria was nearby. Whenever she appeared, the dizziness and headaches intensified. I visited several doctors, but all said I was healthy, which made sense since I had always taken care of myself. Still, I was debilitated, spending days in bed without direction. Tyler, concerned with my situation, came to visit me. He had always been more open to spiritual matters and had strong faith, something I never explored deeply. He mentioned his mother, Mrs. Alina, known for performing spiritual cleansings, and suggested she could help me. With nothing to lose, I agreed. The next day, Mrs. Alina arrived at my house with a peculiar arsenal tarot cards, candles, and a flask with a dark liquid that had a strong smell. I preferred not to tell Victoria and received Mrs. Alina alone. She began reading the cards, but soon became serious. After drawing some combinations, she started talking about a woman in my path, someone ambitious, astute, and full of secrets. As soon as I heard this, Victoria immediately came to my mind. When Mrs. Alina spoke of black magic, I was incredulous. She asked if I was involved with someone, and I showed her Victoria's photo on my phone. As soon as she saw it, her expression hardened. She asked me what I really knew about Victoria, and I had to admit that I knew very little. With new cards, Mrs. Alina described Victoria as someone skillful, manipulative, and masked, someone who hid her true nature. According to her, Victoria might have used love magic to emotionally bind me. I confess this seemed exaggerated, since Victoria had always been somewhat reserved and even distant at the beginning. But Mrs. Alina argued that this initial posture could be part of her strategy, something calculated to attract me. Despite the discomfort with everything I heard, I thanked Mrs. Alina for her concern and attention. I told her I would be fine, and she said goodbye. But in reality, things only got worse. My health continued to decline, and each day I felt weaker. One afternoon, Victoria was at my house. I felt especially bad, with an incessant headache, and decided to rest a little in the bedroom while she was in the living room, engrossed with her phone. Suddenly, I felt an urgency to go to the bathroom. When trying to get up, everything went dark. When I regained my senses, I realized I was in a hospital room. My first instinct was to look for Victoria, expecting her to be by my side. But to my surprise, I saw only Tyler and Mrs. Alina. Both had grave expressions that only increased my anxiety. I asked what had happened, and Tyler explained that I had fainted. Victoria, apparently concerned, called him and called an ambulance. But strangely, she disappeared even before I was taken to the hospital. She didn't even wait to know if I was okay. This left me restless. Why didn't she stay? I tried to justify her absence, imagining she might be frightened, but deep down, something seemed profoundly wrong. Mrs. Alina, with her calm gaze, took my hand and said we needed to talk about something serious as soon as I got better. At that moment, I didn't understand the depth of her words, but soon my life would take an unexpected turn. I spent another day in the hospital, subjected to a battery of tests. To my surprise, the results showed that I was physically fine. I was discharged, but that feeling of strangeness persisted. I returned home, and Mrs. Alina insisted on staying with me for a few days, claiming it would be better for me not to be alone. Meanwhile, my mind wouldn't stop thinking about Victoria, where she was, and why she had left me in that state. It was then that Tyler and Mrs. Alina called me for a serious conversation. They asked me to sit down and said they had something important to share. At first, I thought it was just an exaggerated concern, but the gravity in their expressions left me apprehensive. Tyler began by saying I should confirm with the doctors the reason for my fainting. According to them, the cause was a high dose of powerful sleeping pills that, to my shock, I had never been prescribed. The most disturbing thing came next. Tyler claimed that the doctors discovered Victoria had been administering these medications to me without my knowledge. The cumulative effect was responsible for the fatigue, headaches, and dizziness I had been suffering. The revelation hit me like a blow. A chill took hold of me as the pieces of the puzzle fit together. I didn't want to believe it, but at the same time, it all made sense. Fear began to install itself in me in an overwhelming way. Mrs. Alina continued, and with each word of hers, I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. She recounted that while I was in the hospital, she decided to organize my house. During the cleaning, while watering the plants, she found a bag hidden in the soil of one of the pots. Inside were strange symbols and a powder that she identified as cemetery soil. Convinced it was black magic, Mrs. Alina said she burned and destroyed everything, breaking the spell. I was astonished. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Why would Victoria do something like this to me? What was the objective? What did she really want? We talked, and although we hesitated, we came to the same conclusion. She wanted my money. In panic, I grabbed my phone and opened the banking app to check my account. The shock was immediate. My personal account was completely emptied. I had more than $70,000 in savings, and she had transferred everything. Additionally, in the safe, I kept jewelry, watches, and gold valued at more than $200,000. Everything had disappeared. I had no idea how she managed it. The only explanation that came to my mind was that she used my fingerprint while I slept under the effect of the medications she was giving me. But the safe, it was password protected, and I never revealed that to anyone. The betrayal was overwhelming. The woman I thought was by my side, with whom I had gotten involved, and in whom I had trusted, was in fact physically destroying me. Physically debilitated and financially devastated, I was left without reaction. Anger, fear, despair. It was impossible to distinguish what I felt. The money was lost. There was no way to reverse it. But at least I still had my company. I decided I would recover somehow. I asked Tyler to continue investigating Victoria. I needed to know who she really was. It didn't take long for him to bring more shocking revelations. Before getting involved with me, Victoria had worked as a high-end escort. She chose wealthy men, which explained her refined posture and ability to manipulate situations. Victoria knew exactly how to deceive me. I went to the police to report the case, but I couldn't make progress. She had been extremely careful, transferring the money to a ghost account. Everything seemed planned with precision. After that, she completely disappeared without leaving a trace. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Wait, I apologize. I accidentally included a call to action at the end, which wasn't part of the request. The story is now complete without that element. This tale follows the original plot, while changing the setting to America and altering some details to maintain intrigue and unpredictability. After what I experienced on October 31st, 2023, I've finally decided to write about an experience I've carried for years. For a long time, I tried to erase it from my memory, but recent events have brought back everything that was dormant. The fear and anguish I thought I'd overcome resurfaced as if time hadn't passed at all. I know that for many, these stories might seem harmless or even trivial, but for me, just remembering makes my skin crawl. I prefer not to reveal my name since it's uncommon and would make me easy to identify. Besides, I don't think it makes a difference to what I'm about to tell. In my family, we always learned to value what is good, but we were also taught that there exists a darker side that somehow balances things out. My story begins when I was 17 years old. Today, at 29, I still carry the scars of that moment, even after 12 years. As I mentioned, there are forces of good and evil in the world. I understood this very clearly in my adolescence, when I fell hopelessly in love with a girl named Amara. It might seem like something common. After all, who hasn't fallen intensely in love with someone who, deep down, they knew wasn't the best choice, especially in youth? Before continuing, it's important that I tell you a bit about Amara and her family. She was a young woman with a captivating personality, always with a smile on her face. She had caramel skin, curly hair, a delicate voice, and expressive eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Her body already showed the maturity of a woman. Her mother and grandmother were from Louisiana, where life doesn't always offer equal opportunities for everyone. Like many families, they had moved to Vermont in search of better conditions. Just the three of them lived in the same home. I remember that once, while we were starting to get closer, Amara asked me to meet her family to show good intentions and make it clear that I wanted something serious. I accepted without hesitation. I had already introduced Amara to my grandmother, who, despite being discreet during the meeting, warned me immediately after saying goodbye that something didn't seem right about that girl. My grandmother advised me never to accept anything from her or her family. Not food, not drinks, not even gifts like bracelets or necklaces. It's relevant to mention that my grandmother comes from New Orleans, from a neighborhood where spiritual practices are taken seriously. My grandfather, whom I never got to meet, was a healer. Out of respect for my grandmother's experience, I decided to follow her advice. When I finally visited Amara's apartment, I was surprised at how simple and ordinary the environment seemed. However, what caught my attention most was the appearance of her mother and grandmother. Both looked much younger than they really were. Amara explained that the secret was in creams and a special tea prepared by her grandmother. She even offered to give me some, but remembering my grandmother's words, I refused with an excuse. I said I was allergic to hibiscus and other ingredients and could get sick. Amara didn't insist, and the meeting continued peacefully. During the visit, I took the opportunity to ask her mother for permission to date Amara. She agreed, but not without leaving me with some recommendations. Though I don't remember all of them, one remained etched in my mind. Don't do anything with her without being certain, and never hurt her, because everything in life, sooner or later, comes back to you. At that moment, the words of warning seemed more like a veiled threat, but wrapped up in feelings and passion. I promised myself to do everything to make Amara happy and not let her want for anything. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Our relationship was filled with affection and small celebrations. Each monthly anniversary was a special occasion. Amara always surprised me with thoughtful gestures. For the first 3 months, I accepted the gifts she gave me but never used them, following my grandmother's advice. Until at a party, Amara gave me a necklace with half a heart, I know, kind of cheesy, and insisted I put it on. Reluctantly, I gave in and let her place it on me. It was from then on that I began to feel something different. My love for her seemed to grow exponentially each day. Amara won me over with her small gestures, cookies, chocolates, cakes, and even though I saw no problem in consuming them, my connection with her seemed to deepen more and more. She dominated my thoughts, my dreams, my world. My love for Amara grew so much that over time, I started eating almost exclusively what she prepared. An entire year passed as if in the blink of an eye. The end-of-year holidays arrived, and my family gathered, as was tradition, to celebrate and give thanks for another cycle. It was at this gathering that my grandmother finally met Amara's mother and grandmother. I don't forget the expression that crossed their faces when they greeted each other. A disconcerting seriousness, difficult to describe. Right after the introduction, Amara's mother called her to the kitchen. They began a conversation that seemed loaded with urgency. The only thing I managed to hear was Amara repeating, "I didn't know, Mom. I didn't know." Meanwhile, the party continued. We had dinner, and the interaction between my family and Amara's was cordial and peaceful. When the event came to an end, most people had already left, and we were about to do the same, but my grandmother called me to talk privately. She wanted to know how I was, my health, my studies, my work. I answered everything enthusiastically, saying I was great, that everything was going well. It was then that she gave me a medallion and asked me to recite Psalm 91 every night. Although I had never done this before, I promised I would to reassure her. So time passed. Amara and I had been together for 1 year and 11 months when we became more intimate. I remember an occasion after we had shared a special moment when she suggested we make a pact. No matter where we were or how much time passed, we would always return to each other. I said it wasn't necessary, that I could swear this commitment without any ritual, but for Amara, that wasn't enough. I decided to respect her wish. She brought a black ink and asked me to provide a few things: strands of hair, an entire nail that she pulled out with tweezers, and a bit of blood. Since I was studying medicine, drawing blood wasn't difficult for me. Amara also collected the same items from herself. All the material was deposited in 2 empty cups. Inside, I was holding back a laugh, trying to break the serious tone of the situation. Amara then took a container with something she had previously prepared. I never discovered what it was, and mixed it into the cups that contained our hair, nails, and blood. With an extremely grave tone, she stated that now we needed to drink it. I stared at her incredulously, with the same expression you probably would have, and asked if she was serious. Amara confirmed, and thinking it was some kind of joke, I approached, determined to drink. She encouraged me firmly. I ended up ingesting the contents of the cup. Yes, the one that mixed her hair, nail, and blood. After that, I felt something inexplicable, as if all my senses were amplified to the maximum. It seemed like my perception of the world around me had shot up to 200%. We spent that night together, and the next day we returned to our homes. After this episode, strange things began to happen. I remained completely in love with and dependent on Amara, accepting everything she offered me, food, drinks, whatever it was. The obsessive love for her seemed to consume my thoughts at every moment. Months later, we went together to a party organized by my paternal grandparents. During the event, Amara received a call, and it was at that moment that I discovered something devastating. She was cheating on me with someone from her old town. The discussion that followed was fierce. When I took her back home and we were at the door, Amara looked directly at me and said, "Don't forget, you and I will always be together, no matter what happens." I clearly remember her eyes, which were a light brown at that time, but something in that gaze seemed different, inexplicable. After that, my health began to deteriorate rapidly. My body and mind seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Fatigue, stress, and anxiety took over me. My performance at school and work plummeted. It was 2 extremely difficult weeks until I received an unexpected call from Amara's mother. She wanted to talk to understand what had happened and look for some solution. I agreed to meet her at her house. During the conversation, they offered me a tea, which I accepted despite the tension I felt. Even trying to stay calm, I concluded there was no way to save the situation. A phrase said by Amara's mother, however, remained marked in my mind. "You made a promise, and promises need to be kept." But my pride and anger prevented me from reflecting on those words at the moment, and I left without caring. After that, events only got stranger. I began to drink compulsively, trying to numb the confusion and fear that took hold of me. One night, I was alone in the living room of my house, listening to an Arcade Fire song that I really liked. The lights were off, except for the small lights of the stereo that blinked like in a disco. While looking at the floor, crying, I felt a presence, as if someone was watching me. I quickly raised my head and looked around in the darkness, thinking that some family member had arrived. What I saw was something that, until today, I cannot explain. A tall figure, over 6'6", was in the kitchen staring at me. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it might be some kind of illusion, but when I looked again, there was nothing there. I convinced myself it was just my imagination or the effect of alcohol. I repeated the song, and when turning toward the stairs that led to the second floor, I felt with all certainty that I wasn't alone in that house. I was sitting in the living room facing the stairs, and what I witnessed defies any logical explanation. A male figure of disturbing appearance appeared bald, with a body that seemed to absorb all the light around it. His completely black eyes reflected the void, making him even more terrifying. The skin was of a pale white, in contrast to the long, worn teeth of a yellowish tone that indicated years of decay. His long, bony fingers clutched the handrail with a macabre force, while sharp nails like blades glistened, seemingly ready to cut flesh or bones. His appearance was of a supernatural thinness, almost skeletal. He smiled, or rather laughed at me, with a laugh that still echoes in my mind today. I wanted to scream, but I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't move, as if my entire body was trapped in a state of paralysis. The air around me seemed suffocating and heavy, and cold sweat ran down my face. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't look away from the creature. It was then that he raised his index finger and pointed at me while a voice, almost whispered, said, "You promised something that you need to fulfill." I felt an absurd pressure in my eyes and instinctively brought my hands to my face. At that moment, I regained control over my body. I jumped off the sofa, turned on all the lights in the house, and ran to the yard, waiting for my family to arrive. When I looked again, that thing had disappeared. The days that followed were marked by a profound malaise. I began to have lucid dreams where Amara appeared, begging me to go see her, saying she needed me. However, I resisted. I didn't want to have any more contact with her, not even answer her messages. 2 days later, on a Saturday, I was returning exhausted from my shift at Boston General Hospital. It had been a difficult day. I told my family I would sleep early, since I would have to work again the next morning. After dinner, I showered and lay down. I received a message from Amara, but decided not to open it. Then 3 or 4 more messages arrived. The last one said, "If you don't want to answer me, prepare for the consequences." I ignored it. I was too exhausted to deal with any confrontation, especially with her. I lay on my side, facing the wall as I always did, trying to find some comfort. I don't know if what happened next was real or a dream. The house was plunged into a sepulchral silence, as if everyone had disappeared. I heard the door to my room slowly open, and a familiar voice, my sister's, ask if I was awake. I replied yes, but asked to be left alone. Soon after, faltering steps echoed in the room. I felt the weight of someone sitting beside me on the bed, the mattress creaking as if supporting something extremely heavy. A hand began to caress my back, and then a soft, disturbing voice whispered, "Everything will be fine if you go see her." At that instant, I realized that the voice I had heard was no longer my sister's. It was something completely different. I felt long, thin fingers sliding across my head, playing with my hair as if they were toying with it. When I slowly turned, what I saw confirmed my worst fears: a tall figure, easily over 6'6", sitting next to my bed. I knew exactly what that was. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't obey. The air seemed to escape from my lungs, while I couldn't close my eyes, trapped in that terrifying scene. In my mind, I repeated almost like a mantra, "This can't be. This isn't happening. This isn't happening." Desperate, I tried to remember some prayer or something that could help me. For some reason, Psalm 91 came to my mind, and I began to recite it silently. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." As soon as I finished, the creature began to laugh, but the pressure I felt on my body and on the bed disappeared. I began to breathe normally again. I decided then that the next day I would look for Amara to resolve everything. I arrived early at her house. When she opened the door, I noticed her swollen eyes of a grayish tone and a face thinner than I remembered. We talked, and she admitted that she had spent days unable to eat, feeling guilty for what she had done. She said she wanted to be with me. She offered me tea and cookies, and I accepted. During the conversation, we settled our differences, and fortunately, we managed to resolve everything. From that moment on, the nightly visits from that tall figure ceased. My life took a healthier direction. I focused on taking care of myself, both physically and mentally. I wanted to be someone Amara could be proud of. For almost 2 years, it seemed that everything was fine, or at least that's what I believed, until one day I met someone else who physically attracted me. I arranged a secret meeting, far from anyone who might see us. The relationship was discreet, but Amara found out on the day we were celebrating 2 years of reconciliation. She broke up with me. Amara said she knew what I had done and that she couldn't forgive me, although she affirmed she would continue to take care of me. I begged for her forgiveness, but she remained unyielding. That day, her eyes were completely black. I tried to look for her several times, begging her to come back, but Amara never accepted. Months later, something strange happened. I received a package of cookies sent by her, but I wasn't home when it arrived. My sisters opened it and started eating. My older sister, upon biting one of the cookies, found something hard. When she spat it out, she discovered what it was. The cookie contained nails and strands of hair. Frightened, my sisters broke the other cookies and saw that they all contained them. They warned me never to accept anything from Amara again. Despite this, I couldn't stop thinking about her. It was as if her presence was still with me. Her hair, her voice, her perfume, everything haunted me. The obsession consumed me to the point of leaving the house in the early hours to go to her window, where I would stand just looking. This disturbing routine lasted for days until my parents intervened, especially my father, concerned about what was happening to me. My father confided that he had gone through something similar in the past, although he avoided giving many details. He decided to take me to a friend, someone experienced in such situations, who stated that a very strong work had been done on me. The time elapsed made the solution difficult, but not impossible. This gentleman gave me an extremely bitter tea that made me vomit a black substance. I immediately thought of coffee grounds, something that in medicine indicates digested blood. He also gave clear guidance to my father on how to proceed, what I should consume, and which practices to follow. It was a very complicated period. I lost a lot of weight, unable to eat anything that hadn't been made by Amara. I reached the point of being hospitalized for dehydration twice. One day, I decided I would do everything in my power to get better. I began to pray daily, took the indicated teas, and included the recommended plants in my daily life. For months, I fought against the remnants of that influence. 6 months later, something strange happened. Despite all the effort, I still felt the absence of Amara. I heard that she had tried to look for me, but my family stopped her, even claiming that I had moved far away to avoid more problems. The last supernatural experience occurred when I was already dating Morgan, now my wife. We were going to have dinner at my parents' house, and to get there, we needed to cross a bridge over a ravine called the Frog Bridge. The place is known to children for having many frogs and toads. As we walked, I felt a heavy gaze, something that made the environment seem suffocating. Morgan noticed my change and asked worriedly what was happening. When I raised my head, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Near a post beside the ravine was a huge, completely black bird. But what terrified me most was noticing that instead of legs, it had hands, human hands, clearly defined. I was paralyzed, unable to react. The only thing I managed to say to Morgan was, "Run." We dashed across the bridge, running as fast as we could until we reached my parents' house. After that day, we decided never to speak about the subject again. I know many won't believe me, but I'm convinced of what I saw and what I felt. I even believed that all this was part of a closed chapter of my life, something I had finally overcome. But on October 31st, the sensation returned. While heading to work, I felt a penetrating gaze on the public transport. A long-forgotten sensation ran through me like an electric shock. When I searched for the source, my eyes met others, black as night, strangely familiar. I can't say for sure if it was her, but the uncertainty brought me a wave of memories and feelings I thought I had buried. It was there that I understood the past doesn't always stay in the past. I carry the fear of the pact I made, even without knowing if it really possessed strength. The mere possibility of its authenticity terrifies me. Now I've made a decision. I'm going to run away. I'll distance myself from all this, change my name, my surname, my history, as many times as necessary. I need to escape this shadow that I feel is approaching. I know that no matter how much I try, this black shadow will probably find me. It's like a distant echo that never silences, a constant restlessness that takes hold of me. I can't bear the idea of reliving the horrors of my past, of facing what I swore to abandon. Just thinking about it paralyses me. Still, I'll do everything in my power to keep myself safe, even if it means living trapped in anxiety, carrying this fear that never goes away. It's always with me, a persistent reminder that there is no place where I'm truly safe. What I'm about to share is something many find difficult to believe. Some have accused me of making up stories, and there are even those who have distanced themselves because of it. But I know it's real. My family knows too. Even without concrete evidence, our word and our memories are enough. Although these kinds of accounts often generate skepticism and even jokes, for us who gain nothing from such experiences, there's no reason to invent anything. It all began with my mother when she was still a child. She was about 8 years old back in 1982. At that time, we lived in the same house we do today, though it was quite different then. The walls were low, and the gate opened directly onto the street without bars or fences. One afternoon, while the sky was still bright, my mother crossed the yard to go to the bathroom, which was separate from the main house. From the yard, you could see the street and also the roof of the neighboring house. It was there that my mother spotted figures that seemed to be jumping on the roof. Everything happened too quickly for her to distinguish any details, and she imagined they were neighbors or children playing recklessly. After a while, returning along the same path to her room, she felt something strange, as if she was being watched. Turning around, she noticed 2 figures crouched on the roof of our house. Only their heads were visible, since they were lying down. According to her, they had an unusual appearance, large heads, dark skin with a grayish tone, and eyes that resembled almonds. Fear took hold of her, and the first thought that crossed her mind was that they could be demons or spirits. When my mother told what she had seen, my grandmother was skeptical. That's what happens when you watch too many cartoons. Go mind your business, or you'll end up seeing something real, she said. After that, my mother didn't speak about it anymore. But she was so afraid that she avoided crossing the yard alone, always asking someone to accompany her. Time passed, and gradually life returned to what seemed normal. My mother never saw anything similar again, and came to believe that perhaps it was her imagination or even spirits, as my grandmother had suggested. More than 2 decades passed until she remembered that episode and realized that what she saw might not have been supernatural entities, but beings from another world. The phenomenon returned to the same house, now modified. The roof was concrete now, and some parts were being renovated. That night, my grandparents and uncles had traveled to Lake Champlain, and my mother was alone with me and my brother. One of the newly built bathrooms faced directly onto the street, still without glass in the window. Any noise or light could be easily noticed from there. My mother recalls that once, while using the bathroom, she noticed an extremely bright light coming through the window and illuminating the entire room. It was an intense white light, different from a car headlight, although that was her first impression. But soon she noticed there was no sound. Nothing in our small Vermont town could emit such a brilliant light. The brightness remained for a while, and then abruptly went out. Soon after, she heard quick, short footsteps on the roof. She thought they might be burglars, and worried about us since my brother and I were in the other room. She had a strange sensation, like a tingling that ran through her entire body. It was as if someone or something was responding to her internally, assuring her that we would be safe. She didn't hear any words, but felt as if a voice from inside or outside the house was transmitting this message to her. After that, she lost consciousness. When she woke up, it was almost dawn. She was lying in her bed. My grandfather and my uncles had not yet returned, and my brother and I were still asleep. After this episode, my mother began to feel intense pain in her head, neck, and back. The pain was so severe that she needed to consult a doctor. During the consultation, he asked if she was treating any discomfort after surgery. The question left her perplexed, since she hadn't undergone any recent operations. The doctor explained that there was a scar between her nape and neck, a suture that he considered unusual both for the type of cut and the closure method. My mother made up some excuse, but she knew she had never done anything like that, at least not consciously. To this day, the scar remains, which is why she prefers to keep her hair long and loose to hide it. I believe my mother, especially because strange things have happened to me too since I was little. As a child, I had recurring nightmares about a figure I called Thalos. I don't know where I got this name from, if it was something I invented or if I heard it somewhere. My parents say I would wake up screaming, saying that Thalos wanted to take me away. What I can remember of its form, even in somewhat diffuse images, is something very similar to the beings my mother saw on the roof when she was a child. I don't know if this image was influenced by my mother's stories, or if somehow it emerged naturally. For many years, I didn't experience anything similar again until the beginning of 2023. In January of that year, I went out with a friend and her boyfriend to have fun in downtown Burlington. We went to a restaurant, had some drinks, and stayed talking until late. When my friend wanted to go to the bathroom, everything was already closed. Her boyfriend suggested we go to the outskirts of town, near the old covered bridge, where she could relieve herself without being seen. The place was deserted and seemed the most practical spot to solve the problem. Upon arriving there, each of us moved away a bit to find a place, while her boyfriend waited in the car. While taking care of our business, we were interrupted by a deafening sound. The car horn blaring repeatedly, as if it were an urgent warning. I ran to where my friend's boyfriend was, and when I got there, he just pointed to the sky without saying a word. I looked up and spotted something I had never seen before. A completely round object with a pulsating green light in the center. It was very high, but its shape was evident and imposing, outlined by the moonlight. Still astonished, he said, "Man, that's not a drone or a plane or a helicopter. What the hell is that?" The light from that object blinked intermittently. Despite the distance, it was clear that it didn't resemble anything familiar. I took out my phone in an attempt to record that moment. I took several photos, but when checking them, they were all completely black. No image revealed what we had witnessed. The object then made 2 quick movements and disappeared over the horizon, hiding behind a nearby hill. The 3 of us stood there trying to understand what we had just experienced. We couldn't come to a conclusion. We decided not to tell anyone. The fear of being disbelieved or labeled as crazy made us keep the episode to ourselves. After all, without evidence, it would be easy for people to think it was all made up. And so it has been. These stories, whenever I share them, meet with skeptics. But I cannot ignore the facts. My mother has the scar, and my friends and I know what we saw in that sky. Since that sighting, the nightmares with Thalos have started to return, and I wonder, what's inside those things that fly over our skies? I told my mother what happened, and she, with the experience of someone who has lived through something similar, responded, maybe they'll come back soon. In the region where I live, reports of strange lights in the sky are not rare. Some attribute this to satellites, planes, or drones. Others believe that the magnetism generated by the underground quartz deposits in the region might be the explanation. But for me, the answer goes beyond that. I'm convinced there are other beings out there, observing and crossing our skies from time to time. They approach us, creating these moments that defy any explanation. And sometimes they leave marks, both physical and in our memories, that remind us we are not alone in this vast universe. Last night I woke up sweating. The dream was more vivid than ever. Thalos wasn't just a shadow this time. I could see every detail of his face. And the strangest part, there was a small, fresh cut on my neck this morning. The doctor said it looked surgical. They're getting closer. I can feel it. Have you ever heard about how hatred can shape and corrupt a life to the point of leading someone down a path of no return? The story that follows is a dark testimony to this, a spiral of loss, vengeance, and the unpredictable consequences of dealing with forces beyond human comprehension. I need to share my account because I need someone to listen, someone to understand. This isn't a story to be forgotten or kept secret. It's a confession, and perhaps an attempt to find some relief from the weight I carry. Before I begin, I ask for your patience. I had no choice but to turn to dark magic. It wasn't out of vanity, selfish desires, or ambition, but because it was the only way to end the one who destroyed what I held most precious. Before getting into details, it's important to tell you a bit about myself. I was born with brown skin into a family of African descent that settled in Vermont 3 generations ago. I grew up in a simple community and faced racial prejudice throughout my adolescence. But none of that compares to what happened later, my true Calvary. My nightmare began when I met James. He was white, as was his entire family. We met at university. I was just starting my degree while he was in his final semester. From the first day, James seemed like the ideal person. Kind, attentive, and above all, he made a point of treating me as an equal, ignoring the color of my skin, something I had never experienced before. His manner made me fall for him irremediably. But everything changed the day he took me to meet his family. I remember that occasion perfectly. His parents, Martha and Richard, were very cordial with me, just as James always was. However, his twin sister Victoria's attitude was completely opposite. From the first moment, I felt her contempt. Her look, loaded with superiority and disgust, hit me like a punch. James noticed and quickly removed me from the situation. But the mark of that moment stayed with me. James's family belonged to the elite, owners of several businesses in Burlington, including a rather famous restaurant. My family, though not poor, lived without the same luxuries. My mother an excellent seamstress, and my father had opened a small shop downtown where they sold their creations. Although we lived well, we weren't rich, which gave Victoria even more reasons to treat me with contempt. It wasn't long before Victoria began spreading malicious comments about me at the university. She said I was only with her brother out of financial interest, and that my place at the university was the result of a scholarship. Despite these attempts to defame me, I remained firm. I knew my worth and what I had achieved. Everything changed, however, on the day of my engagement to James. Victoria couldn't bear the idea of seeing me as part of her family. During the party, she followed me to the bathroom and confronted me again, accusing me of wanting to taint the family lineage. I've always been someone who avoided conflicts, but I couldn't contain my tears at that moment. I felt hatred for myself for not being able to react with more control. What should have been the happiest day of my life ended up stained by her cruelty. 8 months later, James and I married and moved to a neighborhood closer to his work. Everything seemed to be falling into place. 2 years later, Victoria also married and had twin daughters. During this time, we managed to keep a certain distance, but things fell apart completely when I got pregnant. It was the beginning of a new nightmare. One day, Victoria appeared at our house with a coldness and disdain I'll never forget. In front of James, she suggested that I should consider terminating the pregnancy, insinuating that the baby would probably be born with dark skin. I was speechless. James, furious, immediately threw her out, but the damage was done. I understood that Victoria would never accept me, and worse, would never accept my child. Months later, our little Hannah was born. She was beautiful. Her skin seemed to radiate a special glow under the sunlight. James and I decided not to invite Victoria to the baptism, which made her even angrier. One day, without warning, she appeared at our door with a cake, saying she wanted to apologize. James, always kind, let her in to meet the baby. When I was alone with Victoria, she hurled another insult, comparing Hannah to an animal. I won't say which, but you can imagine. I couldn't contain myself and slapped her, the sound echoing through the house. She left without saying anything, and I made the mistake of not telling James what had happened. That silence ended up triggering a series of events that ruined our lives. The next major episode was at Christmas at James's parents' house. Victoria was there as expected and didn't miss the chance to make venomous comments. This time, her attacks were directed not only at me, but also at my daughter. It was unbearable to hear her mock and mutter about the unpleasant mixture that was now part of the family. I lost my patience and confronted her in front of everyone, but as always, she played the victim. That night, I decided we would have no more contact with her. I decided to protect Hannah, and keep her away from her aunt's hatred. James agreed, at least at first. For 3 years, we managed to avoid Victoria, and peace finally seemed to have arrived, although a silent feeling still hung over us. Everything began to crumble at James's parents' anniversary when they organized a big party. They insisted so much that we go that I couldn't refuse. Hannah was 4 years old at the time, while Victoria's twins were already 8. Although I feared meeting Victoria again, the girls had never shown their mother's malice, so I allowed Hannah to play with them during the party. That night, Hannah, with her vibrant and outgoing spirit, won everyone's attention. She loved telling stories, and her energy charmed the guests. But it was evident that Victoria couldn't stand to see her shine. Every time my daughter spoke, Victoria showed obvious irritation. I tried to ignore it, but I knew it wouldn't end well. At the end of the party, Hannah told me she had a lot of fun and that the twins had been kind to her. I felt relief, believing that at least Victoria's daughters hadn't inherited her resentment. However, 3 days later, I received an unexpected call. It was Victoria asking me to let Hannah spend the night at her house because the twins wanted to organize a pajama party. The simple idea of my daughter sleeping at Victoria's house caused me discomfort that seemed impossible to ignore. I said no, explaining that Hannah was still too young to spend the night away. As expected, Victoria reacted with her typical rudeness, abruptly hanging up the phone. Shortly after, James came looking for me. He said Victoria had called him crying, claiming that I had treated her badly. I was incredulous. It was difficult to accept that James was questioning my attitude. He looked at me strangely, with a mixture of doubt and disapproval. He asked if I had really been rude to his sister. Those words hit me like a blow. How could he even consider this possibility after everything we had been through together? It was the first of many arguments that began to consume our home. With each call from Victoria, or each invitation she made, the atmosphere between us became more tense. James seemed incapable of seeing the evil behind his sister's mask, while I simply couldn't bear to be near her. The situation reached its limit when Hannah, with her childish innocence, began to ask to visit her aunt's house. It was a difficult request to refuse. My daughter couldn't understand Victoria's true nature, who hid her cruelty behind seemingly kind gestures. After many nights of reflection and several fights with James, I gave in. Maybe I was being too rigid. Maybe my distrust was an exaggeration that was depriving Hannah of happy experiences. I accepted, but I imposed one condition on James. He should stay by Hannah's side the whole time, never leaving her alone with Victoria, not even for a moment. I begged him to keep this promise. James assured me he would do it. Even so, my heart was heavy when I said goodbye to my little one. I hugged Hannah tightly, not knowing that would be our last embrace. James's words in that call still echo in my mind. The desperation in his voice as he asked me to rush to the hospital made it clear that something terrible had happened. I felt my heart stop before even understanding the magnitude of the tragedy. I arrived at the hospital and saw Victoria pretending to cry, which seemed like an insult. When she tried to hug me, I pushed her with all my strength because deep down, I already knew something was terribly wrong. I desperately looked for James and asked about our daughter. He couldn't answer, just cried defeated. It was then that I understood the truth. Hannah was dead. The world seemed to collapse around me. I fell to the ground, unable to process what had happened. The pain consumed me, but what dominated my heart was hatred. Hatred for James for not keeping his promise, and hatred for Victoria because deep down, I knew she had some guilt in what had happened. The following days were unbearable. Unable to sleep, I drowned in guilt for having allowed Hannah to go to that house. My suspicions about Victoria only grew. How could my daughter, who didn't know how to swim, end up in the pool? It was something Victoria knew perfectly well. I had mentioned it in a previous conversation. Yet she did nothing to prevent it. I decided to confront her. I went to her house and demanded that she show me the security camera recordings from that day. With unbearable arrogance, Victoria stated that the cameras weren't working. My suspicion was confirmed at that moment. She was lying. Of that I was certain. Something terrible had happened, and Victoria was hiding the truth. I talked with James, but he refused to listen to me. He claimed I was paranoid, that Hannah's death was just an unfortunate accident. But I couldn't accept that version. I hired a lawyer to investigate. Something deeper was behind my daughter's tragedy, and I needed to find out. When I finally gained access to the recordings, what I saw confirmed the worst scenarios my mind had already imagined. The images showed James and his brother-in-law, Hector, sitting near the pool, laughing and drinking distractedly, while Victoria played in the garden with Hannah and her twin daughters. Everything seemed normal until Victoria approached my daughter and whispered something in her ear. Suddenly, Hannah ran toward the pool, while Victoria walked to the sound system and turned up the music volume. The truth was there before me. Victoria had deliberately led my daughter to the pool, knowing full well that she couldn't swim. The recordings clearly showed that Victoria never did anything to help Hannah. She stayed in the garden, coldly watching as my daughter struggled and drowned. My hands trembled as I watched. I wanted to scream, but the horror paralyzed me. James and Hector continued laughing and talking, completely unaware of what was happening. When they finally noticed, it was too late. Hannah was motionless in the water. From that moment on, I had no more doubts. Victoria had planned everything. Her intention was to punish me in the cruelest way possible, by taking from me the most valuable thing I had. However, the lawyer was direct. The images were not enough to prove that what happened was murder. They seemed merely evidence of a tragic accident. But I knew in the depths of my soul that it wasn't. Victoria had planned it meticulously. Her revenge had been calculated to destroy me. The pain I felt transformed into an unbearable hatred. If justice refused to act, I would have to make her pay myself. Weeks passed without me being able to sleep. My relationship with James was in ruins. He refused to believe that his sister was capable of such evil. He saw me as a woman out of her mind, consumed by grief. His presence revolted me. He had failed me, failed our daughter. Even though he hadn't directly caused Hannah's death, his negligence was determinate. I could no longer bear to be under the same roof as him. The thirst for revenge took hold of me. I knew I couldn't act on impulse, that Victoria should pay for what she had done, but slowly, as she deserved. It was then that I remembered Morgana, a distant cousin who lived in a small town in the Appalachian Mountains. There were rumors that she was involved with black magic in the past. This idea caused me discomfort, but at that moment, it seemed to be the only way out. I called Morgana with a carefully crafted excuse. I said I needed help to save my marriage, hiding my true intentions to avoid raising suspicions. I didn't mention Victoria's name, but Morgana, with her always mysterious way, told me about someone in a nearby village who could help me. I remained silent about my real motivation, fearing she might comment about it to the family. However, deep down, I knew this man was the key to resolving what was eating away at me. I traveled to the village. The place had a dense atmosphere, with narrow cobblestone streets, and a silence that seemed to weigh in the air. The warlock's house was hidden at the top of a hill, surrounded by tall, dark trees. When I knocked on the door, I was greeted by an elderly man with eyes that seemed to see through me. Without beating around the bush, I told him the whole truth. I spoke of Victoria, of what she had done, and of the hatred I carried. I said I wanted her to suffer deeply, to pay for every second of the pain she had caused me. The warlock Edgar listened attentively, almost as if he shared my desire for revenge. He assured me that Victoria would be punished, but warned that the punishment would be slow, that she would unravel gradually. I told him I wanted her to feel every drop of the suffering I had felt since Hannah's death. Edgar explained that he needed something personal of Victoria's, something that was impregnated with her energy. He also warned me, once the ritual began, there would be no turning back. I agreed without hesitation. Back in Burlington, I began to devise a plan to get what the warlock had asked for. It was complicated to approach Victoria without raising suspicions, but I decided to pretend I had forgiven her atrocities. Just the idea of being face to face with her nauseated me, but I knew it was necessary for what was to come next. After much rehearsing, I called her and proposed a conversation. I adopted a conciliatory tone, stating that I wanted to leave the past behind for the good of the family. Victoria, surprised by my attitude, accepted. I went to her house and acted as if I was remorseful, with false tears and words of reconciliation. Inside, every second I spent there fueled the hatred I felt even more. The opportunity came when she withdrew to go to the kitchen. I knew Victoria had the habit of leaving clothes in the laundry basket. I took advantage of the moment and grabbed a blouse of hers, hiding it in my purse before she returned. My heart was racing, but I left there with the peace I needed. As soon as I could, I returned to the Appalachian village and handed the blouse to Edgar. He immediately initiated the ritual, promising that Victoria would begin to feel the effects in a few weeks. However, he guaranteed that the true torment would come with time. I insisted that it be something devastating, that she face the same hell I had been living in since my daughter's death. The first weeks passed without major events. Then the first news arrived. Victoria had fallen down the stairs at her house, fracturing her hip. Although the accident wasn't as serious as I had imagined, I felt a wave of satisfaction. It was just the beginning. The warlock called me saying we needed to advance to a more intense stage of the process. He gave me a small vial with a dark powder, explaining that I should mix it in Victoria's food for 3 consecutive Saturdays. This would be the necessary dose to weaken her even more. The task was almost unbearable. Each encounter with Victoria was a test of my self-control, but I remained firm. I maintained a facade of kindness, bringing her soups and juices. James, without knowing anything, saw my attitude as a sign of reconciliation, believing that I had finally forgiven his sister. Little did he know that with each forkful, Victoria was getting closer to her fate. As the weeks passed, the effects began to appear. Victoria, who wasn't well since her fall, began to worsen. The cough she had acquired became increasingly intense, making it almost impossible for her to speak without choking. One day, she confided in me that doctors suspected a simple pneumonia, but the disease progressed rapidly. Soon she was hospitalized. As much as hatred still burned within me, it was strange to see her in that state. She was unrecognizable, pale, fragile, and with eyes that once radiated contempt, now dimmed, as if life was escaping with each breath. Despite this, I felt no guilt. For me, this was just the beginning of the justice I had so desired. While Victoria was in the hospital, her condition rapidly worsened. She was diagnosed with a severe pulmonary infection, which they later discovered was caused by a drug-resistant bacterium. This infection began to destroy her from the inside out. The doctors tried everything, but nothing seemed to have an effect. I clearly remember one night when James and I were at home, and the hospital called us. Victoria had been intubated and placed in isolation. Only extremely restricted visits were allowed. The news shook the entire family, especially the twins, who cried inconsolably, begging for something to be done. Seeing the girls in that state almost made me waver. There was a disconcerting mixture of satisfaction and emptiness within me. On one hand, I knew my revenge was working. On the other, nothing filled the abyss left by Hannah's death. After weeks in the hospital, Victoria was finally released to return home. However, she was no longer the same person. She was extremely thin, with grayish and dry skin, slow movements, and a lost look. She depended on medications that kept her constantly sedated. During this period, she tried to get close to me again, coming to my house a few times in search of some kind of forgiveness. I received her in silence, just returning her contemptuous gaze. A few days after returning home, Victoria suffered an even more serious relapse. The infection spread throughout her entire body, leaving her completely debilitated. The doctors were clear. There wasn't much more they could do. Her condition worsened rapidly, and she was readmitted to the hospital, now in critical condition. It was the end. I remember clearly the day the news of Victoria's death came. James was devastated. Despite everything, he never stopped loving his sister. The twins cried incessantly, while his parents remained dazed, immersed in a silence of pure incredulity. And I felt nothing. No tears, no sadness, just a cold emptiness. Victoria had received what she deserved, but this didn't bring the peace I had imagined. In the days that followed, my marriage and I fell apart completely. I couldn't face him without reliving the memory of the day. He allowed Hannah to stay alone with Victoria. I never put it into words, but deep down, I blamed him as much as his sister. His naivety and blindness had cost our daughter's life. Living together became unbearable, endless arguments, looks loaded with guilt, and a pain that never diminished. Gradually, I moved away from him until I decided to leave home. It was no longer possible to share the same space with someone who represented everything I had lost. I moved to another city, hoping to escape the weight of my mistakes and the pain that pursued me. But the distance didn't bring the tranquility I sought so much. The nights were the most difficult. Sometimes I could hear Hannah's laughter echoing through the rooms as if she was still there, playing. On other occasions, I would wake up in the middle of the night, my body cold with sweat, feeling that something was watching me, hidden in the shadows. No matter where I went, I couldn't escape what I had done. The nightmares began to appear frequently. I dreamed of Victoria, her pale skin and opaque eyes watching from the corner of the room. Sometimes she whispered Hannah's name. Other times she remained silent, motionless, just staring at me. Although I knew it wasn't real, that it was all just reflections of my guilt, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something much darker was surrounding me. I tried to seek help, but every time I thought about telling the truth, something stopped me. Who would understand the motives behind what I did? Who could accept the darkness I carried? The weight of the revenge I chose fell upon me with full force, and even without regretting Victoria's fate, I realized I had crossed a line that I could never undo. My last trip to the Appalachian village was definitive. I looked for Edgar again, the warlock who had helped me in my quest for justice. I told him about the nightmares, about the presences that seemed to surround me, and about the emptiness that was spreading inside me. He listened to me in silence, with deep eyes, and then said something that froze my blood. Each soul you condemn takes a piece of yours. Victoria is with you now, and will be until the end. Those words echoed in me with an overwhelming force. Until that moment, I had believed that my revenge was legitimate, that Victoria's death would be the end of my pain. But the reality was much darker. The consequences of my actions went beyond what I could imagine. When I returned home, I felt crushed by a weight that defied explanation. The shadows that before seemed to just darken the corners now seemed alive, pulsating. What were once soft laughs from Hannah in the dark nights had transformed into disturbing murmurs, unintelligible words that brought a deep fear. I felt that Victoria was still there with me. She wasn't finished. The nightmares worsened to the point of mixing with reality. It was no longer just Victoria that I saw in dreams. Now, her presence seemed to surround me during the day too. It was as if she was there, invisible, waiting for the right moment to torment me. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would wake up with a suffocating pressure on my chest, as if someone was sitting on me, taking my breath away. Upon opening my eyes, the scene would repeat. Victoria was there, her empty eyes full of hatred fixed on me. I tried to convince myself that they were just manifestations of my remorse, reflections of the guilt I carried. But everything changed one night. I awoke from a nightmare, panting, sweat running down my forehead. When I turned my head and saw Hannah, my daughter, standing at the foot of the bed. For a moment, my heart filled with joy. It was as if she had returned, but something was wrong. Her completely black and lifeless eyes stared at me, with an emptiness that chilled me to the bones. It wasn't my daughter. I jumped out of bed, stumbling over furniture, trying to escape that suffocating room. Even knowing it was my mind playing tricks on me, the fear was overwhelming. I ran to the corridor, only to find Victoria once more. She was there, motionless, murmuring incomprehensible words, while her presence drained all my courage. I was paralyzed, powerless in the face of that terror. Time passed, but my sanity began to crumble. I could no longer distinguish the real from the imaginary. Every corner of the house became a reminder of the tragedy. Hannah, Victoria, the chain of destruction that I myself had initiated. It was as if Victoria was fulfilling her revenge, reducing me to a shell of what I once was. She had accomplished what she always wanted, to completely destroy me. With no other way out, I returned to the Appalachian village one last time. I wasn't looking for revenge or justice. I wanted answers and an end to that torment. I found Edgar, the warlock, with the same penetrating gaze as always. I told him everything, the visions of Victoria, the encounters with the distorted figure of Hannah, the constant fear that pursued me. Edgar listened to everything in silence, his expression indecipherable. When I finished, he looked at me deeply and said, "Victoria's soul remains in this world because your hatred keeps her trapped. But she is not alone. Your daughter is trapped too." His words hit me like a blow. Hannah was trapped too. I couldn't accept it. I protested, claimed that everything I did was for her, to avenge her death. My voice trembled, but Edgar slowly shook his head. "You invoked forces you did not understand. Every action has a price. Your revenge condemned not only Victoria, but also your daughter and yourself." My mind was spinning, struggling to process what he was saying. Everything I did thinking of protecting Hannah only dragged her into an eternal nightmare. Edgar explained that there was only one way to free her soul, to break the bond I had created with Victoria. But this break wouldn't be easy. You will have to face your own pain, accept your guilt, and abandon the hatred that has been consuming you since the day Hannah left. His words were clear, but the path seemed impossible. How to release such rooted hatred? How to face the pain that had defined me since the loss of my daughter? I accepted because I couldn't bear to think that my daughter was trapped in that cycle of pain because of me. It wasn't courage, but desperation. Edgar organized a ritual, one that required me to face Victoria's spirit and ask for forgiveness. It didn't matter what this meant for me. I would do anything to free Hannah. The ritual was conducted at dawn in the same place, where the first works to condemn Victoria had been done. The air seemed loaded, heavy, as if the environment absorbed all the darkness that had been invoked there. Edgar explained that Victoria would manifest, and I would have to face her without yielding to fear. He lit incense and began his prayers, and soon the mist around seemed to gain life, moving like something conscious. Then I saw the shadows around me begin to stir. From one of them, Victoria emerged. It wasn't just a vision. It was the same figure from my nightmares, pale, exhausted, with black eyes that seemed like bottomless abysses. Her presence emanated hatred, but also something else. A sadness so deep it was almost palpable. I faced her with my heart racing, feeling that everything I had done had only fed this darkness. With tears streaming down my face, I knelt before her. My voice faltered, but I managed to speak, gathering all the sincerity my heart could offer. "I'm sorry, Victoria. I regret everything I did to you." She remained silent, but something in her eyes changed. The darkness that filled them began to dissipate, revealing for a brief moment the Victoria from before the hatred, before the pain. And then, like a breath, she disappeared. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Edgar assured me that the ritual had ended, that Victoria's spirit had been released. But I felt no relief, no peace, just a pain that seemed even more intense. Victoria might be free, but I knew I would never forgive myself for everything I had done. I fell to my knees, crying not for Victoria, but for Hannah, my daughter who paid a price that should never have been charged. Although the ritual was over, the emptiness in me only increased. Victoria's absence was now replaced by the crushing weight of my own actions, a guilt that trapped me in an endless abyss. When I returned home, I felt completely destroyed. The shadows that used to pursue me had disappeared, but in their place was a dense, suffocating sadness. I spent entire days without getting out of bed, reliving every detail, every decision that led Hannah and Victoria to this fate. I tried to convince myself that everything I did was for Hannah, but the truth was inescapable. I did it for myself, to satisfy my thirst for revenge. This understanding consumed me. James, still devastated by his sister's death, couldn't comprehend what I was going through. Our relationship, which was already in pieces, completely fell apart. One day, without warning, he packed his things and left. I couldn't blame him. How could I? There was no justification, no way to repair the damage I myself had caused. I moved to a small village near the coast of Maine, trying to distance myself from everything that connected me to James, Victoria, and Hannah. I sought to start over, but the nights continued to be difficult. Although Victoria's spirit no longer pursued me, guilt was still a constant presence. Hannah appeared in my dreams, but never as the happy and innocent girl I remembered. Now she just watched me from afar, in silence, with eyes that reflected an unbearable sadness. Pain and guilt became my inseparable companions. I worked in a small craft shop in the village, trying to fill my days with something that brought meaning, but the emptiness persisted. Years passed, and although the visions of Hannah became less frequent, they never completely disappeared. I knew I would never find peace, and accepted this as part of my punishment. One night, years after the ritual, I received a call that paralyzed me. It was James. His voice seemed distant, but carried a tone that chilled me. He told me that Victoria's twins, now adults, were having frequent nightmares. In the dreams, they saw their mother, but not as they remembered her. The Victoria that appeared to them was dark, a distorted and terrifying version of who she had been. James explained that the nightmares had become so intense that the daughters feared sleeping alone. I listened in disbelief. Even after her release, it seemed that Victoria still roamed, leaving a trail of darkness for her own daughters. A mixture of horror and guilt took hold of me. Had my hatred marked Victoria in a way that transcended death? I asked James if he had sought help. He told me, resignedly, that he had already taken the twins to various psychologists and psychiatrists, but nothing seemed to work. The nightmares persisted. It was at that moment that I realized the true reach of what I had done. My revenge not only destroyed my life, but also cast shadows over those around Victoria, extending to the next generation. I spent sleepless nights, tormented by images of the frightened twins, pursued by their mother's spirit. The feeling of powerlessness was overwhelming. I knew there was nothing I could do to help them, but that didn't lessen my guilt. My quest for revenge left deep scars, not just in me, but in innocents who had no fault in our tragedy. Then one night, I dreamed of Hannah again, but this time it was different. She wasn't distant, just watching me. She was close, looking into my eyes with an expression that mixed sadness and tenderness. For the first time she spoke, her voice soft, almost like a whisper. "Mom, it's enough." I woke up with tears streaming down my face. I knew that was her message, a request for me to let everything go, the guilt, the hatred, the pain I had carried for so many years. Hannah had given me one last chance to free myself, at least in part, from the darkness I had created myself. I decided to try. It wasn't easy, but I dedicated myself to helping others, to finding a way to repair the evil I had caused. I knew I could never erase my actions, but I hoped to somehow transform my pain into something that could bring light to someone. Hannah freed me from part of the darkness, and for her, I decided to seek a new way of living, even carrying the marks of the past. My story of revenge does not have, and will never have a happy ending. What I did cannot be forgiven, and the consequences of my actions will continue to haunt me until the last of my days. However, for the first time in years, I can face the future, even knowing it will always be shrouded in shadows. I learned in a bitter way that hatred does not bring justice. It only leaves a trail of even greater destruction. And so I end this account, aware that although Victoria has departed, the scars left by my revenge remain, touching lives that should not bear this weight. This will be my eternal punishment, knowing that my actions reverberate in those who had nothing to do with my pain. It all started on one of those apps for making new friends. I want to make it clear, I'm not some social failure. I relocated to Seattle during the height of the tech boom, and working remotely in a city known for its freeze didn't exactly create favorable conditions for building a social life. I ended up matching with a woman, let's call her Amber. Honestly, I can't remember if I messaged first or if she did. To be sincere, I was paying more attention to the bios than the photos, and she seemed interesting. Spirituality came up in our conversation, though I couldn't tell you exactly how. It could have come from either side. Lately, I'd been exploring Celtic paganism more seriously, but that was something quite personal to me. It wasn't something I was looking to share or experience with others. My beliefs were more symbolic, but I wasn't completely closed off to new experiences. So when she mentioned being part of a neurodivergent LGBTQ plus pagan lighthouse circle, I thought, wow, that's either extremely specific or extremely broad. But why not? It could be fun. We decided to meet for coffee first, before the gathering. Something curious came up in our messages. She mentioned that her partner was in a strange, Scientology-adjacent rehabilitation program. At first, I assumed it was a place for people trying to disconnect from Scientology. But when I asked if they were still a Scientologist, she simply didn't respond. We met for an hour at a cafe in Pike Place Market. Thinking back, I might have noticed more red flags if we'd spent more time together. Some things triggered my radar, but they were minor and had plausible explanations. Maybe that's why I chose to ignore them, or give her the benefit of the doubt. To my unfortunate luck, I didn't ask more about this supposed Scientology rehabilitation. I remember thinking I should research what Scientology rehabilitation meant, but for some reason, I always forgot to look it up. After everything happened, I did a Google search and found nothing about rehabilitation centers for ex-Scientologists. I wish I'd done that research beforehand. Other things started making sense when I connected the dots in retrospect. Isolated, these things seemed harmless, but together, they made me feel rather foolish. She had a habit of not directly answering questions I asked about herself. It wasn't for lack of trying on my part. I'm someone who doesn't like being the sole focus of conversation, so this made me uncomfortable. In the end, I realized I learned almost nothing about who she really was. Most of what she talked about revolved around her supposed spiritual awakening. This spiritual awakening was peculiar too. Amber said she had an epiphany that she was like a lighthouse, attracting people to help them achieve their own enlightenment. I found it odd, but she was from Sedona originally, so I thought maybe this was normal there. I attributed it to her personal beliefs and let it go. At some point, we started talking about reincarnation, an important theme within paganism. In Celtic tradition, there's an additional focus on ancestors. Amber said she believed she was a new soul with no past lives. This didn't make much sense to me, but it wasn't something I needed to understand. It also wasn't my problem. There was something almost supernatural in the way she talked about herself, but many people like to feel special. This, however, didn't mean I needed to share the same vision. At one point, I shared with Amber about an experience I had at a pagan festival where a woman tried to convince me to pay for her guidance, something I found unnecessary, so I declined. As I told this story, I noticed Amber seemed conflicted. It appeared she wanted to agree with me, but something was holding her back. In the end, she said something vague like, "That was only inappropriate because it's the student who chooses the teacher." I explained that I wasn't looking for a teacher, but I noticed her responses seemed calculated, as if she was just reflecting what she thought I wanted to hear. That gave me an uncomfortable feeling, but I thought maybe it was just nervousness on her part. I admit I can be intimidating sometimes. I'm independent and have a strong personality, so it's understandable that someone might avoid confrontation right away. I wanted to be more relaxed and avoid appearing paranoid, since I have difficulties trusting people. This effort, however, was a massive mistake. I went to the gathering, and the feeling of strangeness began as soon as I entered the house in Queen Anne. It was full of people, all in complete silence, staring fixedly at me. I felt disconcerted and tried to ease the tension by laughing and saying, "Hi," but nobody responded. It was as if every movement I made was being observed, even when I dropped my keys and phone, which only increased my discomfort. Finally, I sat on a low sofa, since there was no space in the main circle. The room was tiny, and about 20 people formed a tight circle. I chose a spot where there was a cushion, but the position was uncomfortable. While the leader spoke, I looked around, curious about the people. I noticed from the corner of my eye that the leader was trying to stare at me, leaning to find my gaze, since a person in front of me partially blocked her view. I felt so uncomfortable that I changed my position, leaning against the arm of the sofa. It was impossible to remain cross-legged on the cushion any longer. The leader ended her speech saying something like, "So spread out," clearly directed at me with a half-joking tone. I didn't know how to interpret that. Afterward, everyone started introducing themselves, and I realized that each person seemed to be a unique kind of neurodivergent. I myself have ADHD, but I don't cling to labels beyond what's necessary to justify my medication, which I've been using since 2015. In fact, that was the only thing they asked us about ourselves, besides our names. The leader then guided us through a meditation, while others made breathing sounds and hums. I understand it's part of the spiritual side, but my restless mind simply couldn't keep up. Following a guided meditation is a real challenge for me, no matter how hard I try. I can only focus on noises like trills and deep breaths. I ended up sitting there with my eyes closed, unable to concentrate. But something she said caught my attention, that we should think of something we would like to ask her, something that would make her necessary. The only question I had in mind was where the snacks were. After all, I had paid $40 and hadn't seen any refreshments. After the meditation, Amber and the leader circulated around the room, distributing materials for an activity. Amber handed me 2 long pieces of string, and the leader gave me 2 sticks. When she handed me the sticks, I took the opportunity to ask about the snacks. She responded with something like, "In the kitchen, on the table where snacks usually are." I'm a sarcastic person with dry humor, so I thought she was joking. I laughed and matched her tone, saying something like, "Oh right, I'll look for them." But I realized she was completely serious, without even a hint of a smile. She just responded with a meh and walked away. This made me think that maybe it was just her way. But I saw her laughing with other women shortly after, and that started to seem strange. When the activity began, she returned to Amber's side and started caressing her back and kissing her hair while giving me an uncomfortable smile. It was frightening. I felt a huge impulse to leave, but I couldn't because of the strange activity we were about to do. The activity was the last straw. They wanted us to think about something painful that we wanted to leave behind. The proposal was to slowly wrap the string around the sticks while feeling the weight of that pain. Honestly, this is something I would only do with my therapist in a safe environment. While people emotionally surrendered to the activity, I simply couldn't participate. I remained with the sticks and string in my lap, doing nothing. This was quite obvious because everyone was involved except me. Being on the sidelines gave me time to observe Amber and the leader, and what I saw was chilling. Amber was making a kind of pyramid gesture above her head with her arms. There were many references to her being a lighthouse or a guiding figure during the meeting. It was evident that she and the leader weren't participating in the ritual. They were conducting everything. That's when it hit me. Amber was using that app to recruit people for the group. She was the only one who seemed to know everyone there, but no one else knew each other. Even the name of the group started to make sense. They cast a wide net, trying to reach as many people as possible. This realization hit me in a matter of seconds and made me nauseous. I'd had enough, but I couldn't just get up and leave because people were pouring out their souls. This was the most disturbing part, watching people open up and share their traumas in an environment that clearly wasn't appropriate. Conducting a ceremony that forces people to relive their pain at the first meeting isn't just disrespectful, it's emotional manipulation. The strategy was clear: force people to feel vulnerable and then offer the path to relieve that same pain. It was a cycle that only served to maintain control over the group. I didn't blame the people who were there, so I did my best not to disrespect them. Some were sobbing so close to the door that they were practically on top of my shoes. I patiently waited for the right moment to ask someone to pass them to me. Finally, I stood up, said I needed to go to my car, and simply left. I sent a message to Amber, saying I wouldn't be coming back and wishing her well in finding the right group for her. I just hope you're never the right group for her. Be extremely cautious about any spiritual practice or ceremony that requires vulnerability, especially when led by people who barely know who you are beyond your name. Some memories from when I was between 7 and 9 years old remain fragmented in my mind, while others came from stories my grandmother told me years later. Back in the late 1980s, our family lived in a small coastal town in Maine. We had a close relationship with Alina, one of my grandmother's friends from her church group. Alina and her daughter would visit us frequently. We'd spend evenings together having sleepovers and enjoying each other's company. One particularly harsh winter night, Alina was having serious trouble with her husband and ended up at our house. I'm not sure if she fled during their argument or if she was already with us when he lost control. What remains etched in my memory is Alina hurriedly guiding me, my cousins, and her daughter into my cousin's bedroom. There she pushed the heavy oak bed against the wall and positioned us behind it, using the mattress and frame as a protective barrier. Then she blocked the door with a large dresser. I was terrified of the dark back then, so I shut my eyes tight and covered my ears while my younger cousin sobbed uncontrollably. That's all I could remember from that night. Years later, my grandmother revealed that Alina had hidden us there because her husband, Richard, had shown up unexpectedly, demanding to see her. My grandmother tried to defuse the situation, telling him Alina wasn't there and that he should leave. Instead, Richard went to his truck and retrieved what looked like a shotgun. He fired as my grandmother ran inside. The blast scattered pellets that struck her back and also damaged the front porch of our house. The sheriff arrived shortly after and managed to subdue Richard without further violence. I'm not certain how much time passed between the shooting and the sheriff's arrival, but my grandmother had called for help as soon as Richard appeared, even before speaking with him. We lived only minutes from the sheriff's office, which probably helped. My grandfather, who worked nights at the paper mill, rushed home to check on us. My father, who shared custody with my grandmother after my mother passed, also appeared at the door. From what I was told, my grandmother couldn't properly explain the situation over the phone, so all my father understood was something like husband, shotgun, children. When he arrived, my father, without thinking twice, punched my grandfather in the face, knocking him unconscious before realizing he wasn't the shooter. Despite this misunderstanding, my father and grandfather never had problems before or after that night, especially once it became clear that my grandfather had only wanted to protect us. My grandmother shared these details with me about a year before she passed away. She died still carrying pellets lodged in her neck and back that doctors said couldn't be safely removed. Those injuries caused pain that followed her throughout her life, but she endured everything with remarkable strength, even when the burden seemed unbearable. What I didn't learn until after her funeral was that Alina had been planning to leave her husband for months, and my grandmother had been helping her prepare. Richard had found Alina's packed suitcase hidden in their garage that very morning. The shooting wasn't just a spontaneous act of rage. It was calculated revenge against both women. Alina eventually testified against him, which led to his imprisonment, but she never forgave herself for putting our family in danger. Sometimes I wonder how differently things might have turned out if Alina had chosen another safe house that night, or if my grandmother hadn't been so quick to call for help. But then I remember what Grandma always said: we don't get to choose our storms, only how we weather them. My boyfriend and I live in a small coastal town in Maine, where the summer tourist season brings all sorts of characters to our normally quiet community. We've become quite accustomed to dealing with eccentric visitors and strange behaviors. But about 6 weeks ago, we experienced something truly disturbing that we only fully understood today. We rent a converted carriage house behind a grand Victorian home, where our landlord and another tenant occupy the main building. Our landlord frequently hosts various guests, which never bothered us, so we didn't think twice when we spotted a woman wandering the property one evening last month. That night we went to bed around 11, but roughly 45 minutes later, we were jolted awake by persistent knocking at our door. I urged my boyfriend not to answer, but he recognized her as the woman we'd seen earlier. Despite this, I had a terrible feeling about the situation, so I quickly dressed, grabbed my keys and our Labrador retriever in case we needed to escape through the back door. I stood in the hallway beside the door, listening to their conversation without being seen. The woman appeared heavily intoxicated and introduced herself as our landlord's fiancée. This confused us, since we were aware of the other people he entertained. However, she mentioned personal details about us and complimented our behavior as tenants, which made us believe she might be telling the truth. After that, she asked for a light for her cigarette, and we thought the encounter would end there. But the situation took an unexpected turn when she began claiming that our landlord was at a hotel, cheating on her at that very moment. My boyfriend only responded with a surprised "wow," but she started flirting with him shamelessly, even inviting him to swim with her in our landlord's private pool, an invitation he politely declined. Meanwhile, my initial concern gradually transformed into mounting frustration. She began rambling incessantly, trapping my boyfriend in an endless conversation. The situation deteriorated further when she started talking about our neighbors, using absolutely appalling racist language I'd never heard before. That's how severe it was. At this point, I was completely exhausted and decided to intervene. I appeared at the door and announced that we needed to sleep because we had early commitments the following day. She was visibly surprised to see me, and her attitude changed instantly. She began attacking us, calling us coastline trash for not putting our recycling out on the correct day, and threatened to have us evicted if we didn't take her side. We simply shut the door in her face. Afterward, we spent a considerable amount of time debating whether we should report the incident to our landlord. We assumed she really was his girlfriend, perhaps mentally unstable, who had caught him being unfaithful and was trying to use my boyfriend for revenge. We decided to send him a message explaining what happened. He apologized, but his response was vague. He neither confirmed whether she was indeed his fiancée, nor mentioned if he would take any action. We thought the problem had ended there, but over the past 6 weeks, she created absolute chaos. She blasted music at maximum volume, pounded on the walls, rummaged through the storage shed, and worst of all, invaded our portion of the yard during the early morning hours. During the first week, I was completely terrified and could barely sleep. I spent entire nights wide awake, listening for every sound and looking through the back window to see if she was out there. Eventually, I grew somewhat accustomed to it, though I remained uncomfortable. Our landlord, on the other hand, vanished during this entire period. We didn't see him again until today. This morning, while my boyfriend was walking our dog, he noticed that our landlord had finally reappeared, sitting on his porch. We decided to talk to him, and that's when we discovered the whole truth. He explained that he had gone out on several dates with this woman, who initially seemed completely normal. After a few outings, they returned to his house, but the following morning, she began acting strangely. He asked her to leave while he was at work, but when he returned, he found her still there. That's when he discovered who she really was. She has a notorious history of moving into men's homes, establishing herself there, and refusing to leave, forcing them to resort to legal measures to evict her. In response, our landlord decided to distance himself by relocating to another property, while building a case to officially remove her. He had been gone for 6 weeks, and we only learned today that she had received an eviction notice on the same day she appeared at our door. That was what prompted her to try flirting with my boyfriend. She wanted to enter our unit and occupy our space. Now it makes perfect sense why she became so aggressive when she realized I lived there too. Our landlord finally managed to negotiate a solution before the eviction deadline was reached. He purchased a one-way plane ticket for her, sending her to another state entirely. I'm profoundly relieved that this nightmare has finally ended. It's disturbing to think how close we came to having this woman force her way into our lives and potentially our home. Now, every time I hear a knock at the door after dark, I feel my heart race a little faster, wondering what might be waiting on the other side. It all began on a crisp autumn evening that promised nothing but relaxation and laughter. I was visiting my childhood friend's cottage, one of those charming lakeside hideaways that perfectly blends cozy comfort with casual disarray. We hadn't seen each other in ages, so we were eagerly catching up amid scattered cushions and warm blankets in a living room that radiated feminine touches and woodland charm. We settled into our oversized sweaters, ready for our planned marathon of classic 80s horror films. Despite the slight disorder, the space had an authenticity and warmth that made me feel completely at ease. For dinner, we decided to order from the local barbecue joint. That's when she mentioned that Callum, someone I'd never heard of, would be delivering our food. Initially, I felt a twinge of annoyance, imagining she might have invited another friend, a guy to join our evening, which wasn't exactly what I had in mind. But I was mistaken. Callum was simply the delivery person on duty that night. When he arrived, something about his demeanor caught my attention. He seemed uncomfortable, almost awkward, fumbling with the food containers and avoiding direct eye contact. My friend introduced him briefly, and it didn't take long for me to notice, from her excessively grateful tone, that Callum played a larger role in her life than merely bringing dinner. After handing us our food, there was a brief, clumsy attempt at conversation. My friend, always polite, was incredibly kind while he seemed out of place, stumbling over his words. Before leaving, Callum asked for my number. The situation was embarrassing at best, especially with our mutual friend standing right there. Somewhat reluctantly, I shared my contact information. He tried to make small talk, but my friend quickly cut him off with a cheerful, "Thanks so much for bringing the food, Callum." He took the hint, and the farewell continued with an awkward half-hug. When he finally left, my curiosity got the better of me, and I asked my friend what was going on. She explained that Callum essentially served as her unofficial personal assistant, running errands, picking up deliveries, and seemingly willing to do any favor requested. It became clear to me that he was just a lonely soul desperate for connection, especially with women. We were both young and perhaps a bit naive at the time, around 23. But I could sense something deeply troubling about the situation. It was difficult to articulate, but there was an unmistakable unease in the air. After that day, Callum created a group chat that included my friend and me. He would send random memes occasionally, perhaps once a week. It seemed like a careful attempt to maintain his presence without crossing boundaries. It was evident that he knew the risk of being blocked or ignored, as had probably happened before. His strategy appeared to be a subtle way to remain present without giving reasons for rejection. At least that was the impression I got. Callum also frequently offered assistance with various tasks, but I always declined with a simple, "Thanks, but I'm good." Nevertheless, he persisted every weekend until one day I finally accepted, knowing it might lead to complications. I needed to pick up and install a washing machine I'd found at an incredible price through an online marketplace, but had no idea how to manage it alone. When I mentioned this in the group chat, Callum immediately volunteered to handle everything. And true to his word, he did an impeccable job, taking care of every detail from collection to installation. It was an enormous relief for me. Afterward, I tried to pay him for his efforts, but he refused any money. I insisted strongly, and he suggested I could repay him differently, by accompanying him on a hike. I felt uncomfortable. It seemed too personal, almost like it could be interpreted as a date. He insisted, however, that it was just a casual walk, nothing more. The idea was that it would be a fair exchange for the favor. I eventually agreed, convincing myself that this was a reasonable way to repay him. Besides, perhaps he simply wanted company, as he didn't seem to have many friends. The hike initially seemed like an opportunity to help him in a more humane way. Despite this, part of me couldn't ignore the discomfort of being with him in such an isolated location. On the agreed day, Callum chose a nearby trail that I was familiar with. It was beautiful, with vibrant fall colors and crisp mountain air. During our walk, he talked about local history, the weather, his hobbies, all quite ordinary conversation, until he suggested we deviate from the main path to see something special he wanted to show me. This made me apprehensive. What could be so special? What I found was completely unexpected, a body abandoned in the underbrush. My heart raced while Callum remained disturbingly calm, almost indifferent. The naturalness with which he reacted made me even more uncomfortable. It was as if he wasn't merely showing me a corpse, but revealing something dark about himself. The smell was unpleasant, but not as intense as I would have expected. I can't say how long the body had been there. I'm no expert in that field, but it seemed that the stronger odor had already diminished with time. At that moment, I made up an excuse, claiming I needed to return, and began walking hurriedly back to the main trail. I encouraged Callum to come with me, but the feeling was that he was trying to send a silent message, something like, "You should know I'm not just a harmless guy." Another possibility crossed my mind. Perhaps he wanted me to think more about him. I've noticed that some people fear being forgotten as soon as they say goodbye. Maybe Callum felt this way about me and thought something so shocking would make him unforgettable. I'm not certain. I only know that I could never look at him the same way again. My mind was a storm of thoughts as we walked back, but outwardly, Callum seemed completely oblivious to the gravity of what had just happened. I was on high alert, fighting against the sensation of imminent danger, constantly scanning the surroundings in hopes of spotting other hikers or forest rangers. Any sign of another person would make me feel less isolated in that surreal situation. When I finally spotted someone on the trail, I approached them, not to report Callum, but simply to ask for directions back to the parking lot. It was my excuse to ensure we wouldn't be alone. I insisted that the elderly gentleman accompany us, pretending to be confused about the path. Fortunately, he agreed, perhaps due to my persistence. For me, having that stranger nearby was like an anchor, bringing a bit of safety and reality, while my body processed the shock of what Callum had shown me. Upon reaching the parking lot, I called my friend, saying I was with Callum and that he would drop me off at her cottage in 20 minutes. Callum accepted the suggestion without questioning. This was my attempt to ensure that if something went wrong, there would be a record that Callum was the last person with me. Additionally, I sent a message to my friend, detailing what had happened to document everything. As soon as we arrived at the cottage, we thanked Callum politely and dismissed him. I then told my friend everything in detail, how the body was covered with insects, the face already decomposing but still recognizable. She was horrified, not just by the discovery of the cadaver, but also by Callum's strange indifference to it all. She confessed that she always had a bad feeling about him, but never imagined something so macabre. Together, we decided it was time to cut Callum out of our lives. My friend admitted she had become too dependent on him, which made it difficult to simply push him away all at once. So we created a plan. We would gradually reduce contact, avoid one-on-one meetings, limit responses to his messages, and slowly my friend would ask for fewer favors. Even so, Callum continued sending messages on weekends, offering help or asking if we needed anything. My friend carefully began responding with phrases like, "I'm trying to be more independent, but you've been a great help." Eventually, as she started dating someone new, she introduced Callum to her boyfriend, and surprisingly, he never contacted us again after that. That same night everything happened. I called the police and reported the incident. Weeks passed without any updates, until 1 month later, news confirmed the discovery of a body in that area of the trail. The police made an arrest, but not of Callum. The suspect was another man whom Callum followed on social media. I never found out if Callum had any direct connection to the murder. But now, reflecting on this disturbing experience, one clear lesson emerges. Trusting your instincts is essential. There was something deeply wrong about Callum that I sensed from the beginning, something beyond his awkward exterior and desperate need for connection. Was he the killer, an accomplice, or just someone with a morbid fascination? I'll never know for certain. Sometimes I still wonder why he chose to show me that body. Was it a warning, a confession, a test? The questions linger, even now, years later, when I've moved far away from that small lake town and the memory of Callum's unsettling presence. But whenever I feel the urge to ignore that little voice inside warning me about someone or something, I remember that day on the trail, and I listen. Some stories pull us into a moment that seems to exist outside of time, like we're diving into something between reality and imagination, yet with such vivid weight that we can't ignore it. The memory I'm about to share has that quality, a childhood experience that hasn't lost its luster despite the years passing. Something inexplicable. Many years ago, something happened that still occupies a special place in my memory, like it was almost a magical event. I wonder if experiencing this at my current age, my reaction would have been different. Fear would probably have paralyzed me, but back then, with the purity of a child's mind, fear was non-existent. Innocence truly is a blessing when the mind hasn't yet been touched by doubts and worries. I can still relive every detail as if it happened yesterday, and I'm certain it was real. Even as a child, I had clarity to distinguish between what existed and what was imaginary. I've always considered myself someone with sharp reasoning, and from an early age, I understood there are phenomena science cannot decipher, but that are nonetheless present, inevitable, and real. I was 11 years old when this experience occurred. I was living with my grandparents in a small town in Vermont, near the Appalachian Mountains. Close to their house was a spacious, tranquil park with old wooden swings and a slide. It was an enchanting space, surrounded by fresh air and respected by all the residents of the area. One tree stood out from the rest, enormous, with a robust, twisted trunk and dense, vibrant leaves. Its branches were dark and sinuous, as if they carried their own stories. After school, I loved visiting the park, especially that tree. When my parents were busy with work and my grandfather was looking after me, he would allow me to go as long as I returned within 3 hours, which was easy since the park was just 2 streets away from home. In those days, the town was quiet and safe. My favorite pastime was climbing the tree and settling on one of its horizontal branches that seemed perfect for sitting. 2 cut ropes hung there, evidence that at some point a rudimentary swing had been installed, though I had never seen it in use. Fascinated by this, I asked my grandfather to help me install a new swing using a wooden board and new ropes he kept in his workshop. He suggested I use the swings that were already in the park, just a few feet from the tree, but I insisted. There was something special about that oak that made me feel sheltered, protected. I was stubborn and eventually my grandfather helped me. When the swing was finished, I felt radiant. Few people used it, which gave me a sense of exclusivity. It was my private refuge. Months later, on a day when I had been busy with studies and exams, my grandfather allowed me to go to the park later than usual. It was like a reward, a moment just for me. To the sound of crickets and under the glow of a full October moon, I remember climbing to the top of the tree that night, losing myself in the immensity of the starry sky. It was a peaceful, fascinating spectacle. However, something caught my attention. The swing below began to move. Initially, I didn't find it strange. The wind could very well be responsible. But gradually, the movement became more intense, and then I realized this wasn't the work of the wind. I sat watching the swing, not knowing exactly how to react. Finally, I decided to climb down from the tree and sit on it, trying to discover what was causing those strange movements. But as soon as I sat down, the swing became motionless. I began to swing gently while trying to understand what had just happened. It was at that moment that I heard a childish, mischievous giggle that seemed to come from very close by. Instinctively, I looked around, but there was no one there. Unable to contain my curiosity, I asked into the emptiness, "Who's there?" "Who are you?" No response. I continued swinging, trying to listen more carefully. Perhaps I had imagined that laugh. While I was lost in these thoughts, I felt the swing move on its own without me pushing it. It began to rise higher and higher. Frightened, I clutched the ropes tightly and screamed, unable to control the swing. Once again that laugh sounded, now very clear, though I couldn't identify where it was coming from. Without doubt, it was very close. I tried to use my weight to stop the movements of the swing, but it didn't help. The sensation of having no control over it left me frustrated and powerless. After a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, the swing finally stopped. I quickly got off and looked around, searching for whoever was playing with me. I wasn't afraid, but rather annoyed because that girl, if it was a girl, wouldn't appear to talk to me. I shouted again into the emptiness, "Girl, come here. Show yourself. I promise I won't hurt you. We can be friends if you want. I don't have any friends, and you would be my first." The park, until then filled with small nocturnal sounds, plunged into total silence. Even the crickets stopped singing, and the wind seemed to have ceased. It was then that I heard the sound of the tree branches moving. When I looked up, I glimpsed the silhouette of a girl sitting at the highest point of the tree. The moonlight wasn't enough to see her features clearly, and the shadows hid much of her figure. I decided to climb up to her. I climbed as fast as I could, but when I reached the top, there was no one there anymore. Irritation took over me. It seemed she was playing with me, running away every time I got close. I felt a lump in my throat, and tears began to roll without me being able to avoid them. While I was crying, something strange happened. I felt a whisper very close to my neck, as if someone was saying something directly into my ear. At first, they were just incomprehensible murmurs, but then the words became clear. "Friend," that voice repeated the word friend, and for a brief moment, my heart filled with joy. Could it be that she really wanted to be my friend? That magical moment, however, was interrupted by the sound of my grandfather's voice, calling for me repeatedly, with a tone of concern. He seemed quite nervous. I quickly descended from the tree and went to meet him. When I found him, he asked why I had taken so long. I didn't know what to answer. Between the confusion and the strange events, I hadn't realized how much time had passed. To my surprise, it was already almost 10 o'clock at night. I went home that night, but couldn't get the tree girl out of my head. Something in me was certain she would be waiting for me the next day, and I decided to return at the same time. However, no matter how much I called for her, there was no sign of her presence. I repeated this routine for several days, nurturing the hope of seeing her again, but she never appeared again. Despite my attempts, I never heard or saw that girl another time. Years later, I made friends with some neighbors my age, and together, we began to frequent the park almost daily to play. During a conversation, one of them revealed that she had also heard the girl in the tree, while her sister told me that on another occasion, she had even seen her. This intrigued me deeply. It couldn't be just coincidence. All of us had experienced something similar in that same place. Sometime later, my parents became friends with an elderly couple who had lived in the town for more than 50 years. They were kind people and loved to tell stories about the area. During a visit, I decided to ask if they had ever heard of a girl in the park tree. Their answer surprised me, and in a way, explained what had happened to me. The couple recounted that decades ago, a family lived in the town amid a crumbling marriage. The father and mother fought incessantly, and the couple's daughter, a girl of only 8 years, used to run away from home to escape the arguments. Her refuge was the park, and especially the large oak tree that she loved to climb. One day, in the midst of a more intense fight between her parents, she ran out of the house crying heavily after witnessing her father assaulting her mother. Disturbed, the girl climbed the tree, but in her haste, she slipped and fell. The impact was fatal. She broke her neck and died instantly. This story gave new meaning to everything I had experienced in the park. I realized that I hadn't been the only one to go through something like that. Other children who frequented that place had also witnessed or felt strange things, laughs, inexplicable movements, or even the presence of the girl. To this day, this memory remains vivid in me and makes me reflect. Did that girl know she no longer belonged to this world? Perhaps she was just trying to find friends to play with, something she never had while alive. But there's one last detail I've never shared before, something that happened the night after I last visited the oak. I dreamed of her, this time seeing her clearly. She had auburn hair in 2 braids, wore an old-fashioned dress with small flowers, and her eyes held a profound sadness mixed with loneliness. In the dream, she was swinging higher and higher on my swing, laughing, not mischievously as I'd heard in the park, but with pure joy. She looked at me and simply said, "Thank you for being my friend, even if just for one night." When I woke up the next morning, I found something impossible on my bedside table. A small, withered oak leaf folded into the shape of a heart. I've kept it all these years, a reminder that some connections transcend the boundaries between our world and whatever exists beyond. Accounts of paranormal phenomena are often described as terrifying experiences, and honestly, that's no exaggeration. Most people imagine seeing a spirit or witnessing something floating in midair. But for me, it's the doubt, the unresolved suspense, that causes a much deeper fear. When you actually see something, at least you know what you're facing. My name is Sarah, and what marked me most profoundly was exactly the opposite, not seeing what was there. To this day, I consider it the most terrifying episode of my life. It happened when I was only 17, many years ago. Back then, I frequently visited my grandfather, who lived in a remote part of northern Maine, in a small logging community with no more than 200 residents. But his house was even more isolated, an old cabin about 15 minutes from this tiny settlement, surrounded by dense forest. Tales of supernatural myths and legends were commonplace there. Locals claimed to have spotted all kinds of creatures around the settlement, from wendigos to ghostly lumberjacks, or even the infamous White Lady of the Woods. Though I never fully believed these narratives, I had never experienced anything supernatural myself. Still, whenever I visited, I silently hoped I wouldn't encounter anything of the sort. My grandfather's cabin had no electricity, which only reinforced the mysterious atmosphere of the place. We relied on oil lamps to illuminate the interior, and outside, when night fell, the darkness was almost absolute. Seeing anything was impossible. The wind seemed to dance between the towering pines surrounding the cabin, creating unsettling noises that amplified the feeling of isolation. During my visits, I always slept in a room on the upper floor, beneath a tin roof that amplified every sound from the forest. Because of this, after dark, I avoided getting up as much as possible, not even to use the bathroom. My grandfather often said that people in the region believed a wendigo roamed those woods. Perhaps that's why I felt constantly on alert, watching my surroundings and hoping not to cross paths with anything beyond the silence. But on that particular night, something different happened. I was preparing for bed when Grandpa wished me good night and went to his room downstairs. I tried to sleep, but noticed the cold was more intense than any other night. I pulled 2 blankets over myself and curled up my legs to try to get warm. But the cold persisted, almost unbearable. I thought about getting up to look for something warmer, but suddenly I began to hear a strange sound. At first quiet, then louder with each passing moment. It sounded like metal violently striking against stone. I tried to find a logical explanation for the noise. My conclusion was that it came from the stone well in the yard, used to draw water. However, something was very wrong. The well bucket was far too heavy, and the sound of the impacts was so powerful it seemed like someone was angrily throwing it against the edge. The atmosphere carried something disturbing, an uncomfortable sensation, as if I were being watched by invisible eyes. I was already quite nervous, trying to convince myself that it was just the wind blowing forcefully that night, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. The sound of the bucket hitting the well continued, growing more insistent. I couldn't understand how my grandfather remained in bed without getting up to investigate such a loud noise. I decided to peek through the window, but the darkness of the yard was an impenetrable wall to my eyes. That's when another sound emerged, mixing with the first. This time it seemed like something running, quick footsteps, almost like those of a wolf, but different somehow, more hurried and abnormal. That sound circled around the cabin. My first thought was that it could be some animal, which wasn't uncommon around there. But it was strange for one to appear at such a late hour. I tried to calm my mind and ignore it, but the sound rapidly approached until I was certain, whatever it was now right outside my door. I jumped, shrinking back with the blanket clutched against my body. The uncertainty was unbearable. Anything could be out there. And then the sound stopped. This silence, instead of bringing relief, terrified me even more. Where was that thing now? My eyes scanned the room, filled with fear, expecting at any moment to see something emerge from the darkness. Time passed slowly, and nothing happened. When I began to believe the worst was over, the silence was brutally broken. It was a screech, not like a horse as in the original story, but something between a mountain lion's cry and a woman's scream, very close, as if it were right by my window. Yet my grandfather didn't have mountain lions near his property, and I didn't know of anyone in the surrounding area who had reported such animals. The strangest thing was that the sound didn't stay in one place. It appeared on the right, then on the left, as if whatever made it could move from one side to the other in a matter of seconds. I desperately wanted to see what was causing all this. The doubt and lack of answers consumed me. My mind spun, searching for a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. Finally, another sound emerged, the most terrifying of all. It was the noise of heavy, rusty chains dragging across the floor outside. Just like the screeching, the sound seemed to come from all directions, including inside the house. For a moment, I thought it might be my grandfather, but he never walked in the dark without an oil lamp, and there was no sign of any light. The chains produced a sound, so loud it seemed to pierce my ears. With each moment, the sound grew closer, more intense, until I heard it directly outside my door. I held my breath, expecting the door to suddenly open. But that didn't happen. Instead, I felt the chains scraping against the wooden door, and for an instant, I saw a shadow projected through the gap at the bottom. My muscles were so rigid and tense that even the cold disappeared, as if my body was locked, not knowing what to do. The only idea that came to me was to pray. So I began to whisper the Lord's Prayer, repeating it for long minutes that seemed to never end. Gradually, the sound of the chains began to diminish, slowly moving away until it completely disappeared into the silence of the night. I was exhausted, and almost unbelievably, I ended up closing my eyes and falling asleep. When daybreak finally came, watery sunlight filtering through the cabin windows, I discovered something I hadn't noticed in the dark: 3 deep scratches across my door, as if made by massive claws. There was also a strange, sulfuric smell lingering in the hallway. The next morning, I didn't tell my grandfather anything. I knew he would probably dismiss what I had experienced. Despite multiple visits after that, I never again stayed overnight at the cabin. Sometimes, in the years since, I've wondered if what I heard was the Wendigo of local legend, or something else entirely. All I know is that I never want to experience anything like that again. As I mentioned before, it was precisely the fact that I couldn't see what was terrorizing me that made everything even more frightening. To this day, whenever I hear chains dragging or an unusual animal cry, my blood runs cold as I remember that night in the Maine woods and the terror of the unseen. My name is Michael, and if you're hearing these words, it's already too late for me. I never imagined that my fascination with mysteries, horror stories, and crime dramas would lead me here. Since childhood, I obsessively watched every film I could get my hands on, memorizing the dialogues of classics like The Silence of the Lambs, The Exorcist, and Sherlock Holmes. These works shaped how I saw the world, faced challenges, and even believed I could become a real detective. Over time, I developed a knack for solving mysteries invisible to others, attentive to details that went unnoticed. Sometimes I felt like destiny had something grand in store for me. But there was one lesson from detective films I never fully understood: true fear. Screens make it seem simple: an electrifying chase, a surprising twist, a villain defeated by the hero's cleverness. But reality is quite different, especially when something dark relentlessly pursues you. 5 years ago, I began investigating the disappearance of a young woman in Portland. It seemed like a routine case, one of those that nobody wants to touch because they often involve organized crime, and everyone knows not to mess with that. Still, I decided to proceed alone. That's when I found them. At first, I thought they were just urban legends, superstitions believed by gullible people. But as I unraveled the layers, I realized there was something much more concrete, terrifyingly concrete. Strange symbols, ancient rituals, human sacrifices. What I discovered frightens me more than I can express. I write this from a motel in Montana. I've already changed hotels twice this month. I've changed my identity numerous times, but they always find me. My life has been reduced to fear. Not the fictional fear from movies. It's the kind that tightens your chest and makes you doubt if you'll see another dawn. Whenever I feel eyes watching me or answer a phone call with only silence on the other end, I know they're close. I don't know how much longer I can run. This cult doesn't forgive and never forgets someone like me, someone who knows too much. I know how their rituals end. It's only a matter of time before they come for me. I discovered Amanda's disappearance by chance. I was in a coffee shop when I overheard two people talking at a nearby table. One of them mentioned her name. It had been years since college, but it was impossible not to recognize it. Amanda Bennett was unique. Not the most popular person or someone who attracted attention through parties or scandals. But she had her own light, that rare type of person who charmed through her way of being, through genuine simplicity and an easy smile that brightened everything around her. I remember seeing her in the front rows of classes we shared. We weren't close, just exchanged typical greetings of acquaintances. A quick hello or some trivial conversation when we ended up in the same group. I was introspective, while she seemed to live in harmony with the world. This contrast made me uncomfortable, not because she was arrogant, but because her naturalness made me feel awkward. So when I heard she had disappeared weeks earlier, I felt something ignite inside me. I knew it made no sense to get involved. After all, we were never friends, just acquaintances. But for some reason, her name wouldn't leave my mind. It was like something was pulling me, a feeling of obligation difficult to ignore. Perhaps it was the dormant desire to prove to myself that I could be a real detective, that all those hours invested in books and films weren't just entertainment, but a real skill. I decided to investigate, and that's how it all began. I started with basic information. Amanda had an active social media presence until shortly before her disappearance. Photos of her at cafes, outings with friends, everything appearing normal. But upon closer inspection, something didn't add up. The comments on her latest posts weren't from people I recognized from college. In fact, almost all the friends who previously appeared in her photos had disappeared. Her new circles consisted of unfamiliar faces, people no one seemed to know. Additionally, the posts became increasingly rare, and the few images that appeared gave an impression of isolation. My first action was to ask at the small market where she was last seen, a place in the outskirts of Portland. The clerk couldn't remember many details, just said she had made purchases and left like any other customer. However, a woman who was there that day brought something more concrete. She said she saw Amanda heading to an old building in the hills, an abandoned warehouse that, although unused for years, had been arousing residents' curiosity in recent months for mysterious reasons. I decided to go there. I waited until nightfall and went armed only with a flashlight and a notebook to record what I might find. The place was a desolate scene. Walls covered in graffiti, broken windows, and the unmistakable smell of mold. But what really caught my attention were strange symbols painted on the floor and walls. These didn't seem like the work of bored teenagers. They were disturbing drawings, geometric figures and shapes beyond my comprehension. The most unsettling detail was the red paint used which, under the weak light of the flashlight, seemed dangerously similar to the color of blood. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line, that I was seeing something that should remain hidden. When I returned home, the symbols wouldn't leave my head. I spent the night online, diving into the internet searching for any clue that might decipher what I had seen. After hours navigating dark forums and sites that exuded a clandestine air, I found a discussion in an obscure group about ancient rituals and American cults. One of the participants mentioned a symbol that perfectly coincided with what I had found in the warehouse. I continued reading and came across something frightening. Sacrifices, disappearances, devotion to entities the world didn't even know existed. It was at that moment I understood that Amanda's case was much more complex and terrifying than I had imagined. She wasn't just a young woman who got lost or ran away from home. She had been swallowed by something much darker, something that had always been there, but no one had noticed. From that point, I knew there was no turning back. Every fiber of my body told me to abandon it and go on with my life. But the detective intuition insisted I was on the right track. Only, along with that certainty came a growing fear, a chill in my chest that made me question how far I would be able to go. As I advanced in my investigation of Amanda's disappearance, strange things began to happen. What had started as simple curiosity was transforming into something bigger. And the more I delved into the mysteries of the symbols, the more the circumstances around me seemed to depart from the ordinary. It all began on social media. I received a friend request from an unknown profile, nothing too strange until then. But then came others, followed by several more. At first, I thought they were fake accounts or bots, but the profiles seemed real: family photos, old posts, legitimate connections with friends of friends. The problem was, I had never seen those people before. I ignored the requests, at least at first, but the pattern repeated on other networks like Instagram and Twitter. Strangers began to follow me and interact in ways that seemed harmless, but deeply uncomfortable comments like "nice photo" or "interesting" sounded innocent. But there was something about them that bothered me. It didn't take long for this to spill beyond the virtual space. Suddenly, I began to cross paths with strangers in places where I would never expect to meet someone I knew. In the supermarket line, someone would greet me as if we were old friends. In a comic book store, a stranger would strike up a conversation, casually mentioning my passion for horror films. At first, I confess I liked it. It seemed that somehow I was gaining recognition, but not like a famous person. It was something more subtle, almost disguised. But something was wrong. I didn't know any of those faces. One day, while reviewing my notes on the case in a cafe, a woman approached. Her demeanor was too serene, as if every gesture had been rehearsed. "May I sit down?" she asked with a controlled smile. Before I could answer, she began to talk about my work, about the investigation, without me having mentioned Amanda or the symbols. She seemed to know exactly what I was involved in. She explained that her group also had an interest in these matters, and if I wanted, she could introduce me to some people. Her voice was calm, almost too gentle, but there was something in the way she formulated her words that made my stomach turn. "No thanks, I'm fine as is," I replied. She didn't insist, just smiled slightly, got up, and left as if it didn't matter whether I accepted or not. But that encounter left me unsettled. After that, I began to feel that I wasn't alone, even when I should be. The paranoia grew each day. It wasn't just the friend requests or comments on networks. It was the feeling that wherever I went, someone was watching me. One night, returning home, I noticed a man standing on the corner. He wasn't doing anything, just staring at me intently. When I confronted him, he smiled, turned his back, and walked away. The next morning, when I opened my Facebook, there was a new friend request. The profile displayed the photo of the man I had seen the night before. I knew with every fiber of my body that these people weren't appearing by chance. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone was orchestrating all this, monitoring every step I took. It was as if they knew I was getting close to something important, something they needed to keep under constant surveillance. That's when the real fear began to manifest. Until then, everything had seemed distant, almost abstract, as if I was just playing detective. But at that moment, I realized it wasn't just that. I was being watched, followed, perhaps even hunted. And the worst part was not understanding why. I never imagined that something as simple as a theft could trigger such profound terror. At first, I didn't even consider it as such. The evening had started pleasantly. A few days earlier, I had met a woman at a bookstore. Don't ask me how. I was never someone who flirts easily. But we started talking about horror films, exchanged numbers, and arranged to go out that night. We went to a cinema to watch a mystery film. It wasn't anything special, but it helped distract me from everything I had been investigating about Amanda and the symbols. When I returned home, something was wrong. It wasn't anything immediately visible, but the atmosphere seemed heavy, as if something had been displaced. Walking through the apartment, I didn't notice anything out of place at first sight, but when I reached my desk, I understood what was strange. My computer had disappeared. Along with it, my notebooks and my camera were also gone. For a moment, I stood still, trying to remember if I might have moved everything myself. But upon closer inspection, I realized someone had entered my home. My first reaction was to think it was a common theft, but soon everything started to feel wrong. Objects of greater value remained untouched: the television, a small safe I kept in a drawer, even a treasured watch. None of this had been taken. The target was clear: my computer with all the documents, photos, and links related to Amanda's case, my notebooks full of notes, and the camera where I had started to record images of the symbols in the abandoned warehouse. Everything connected to the investigation had vanished. It was as if the person knew exactly what to look for. The knot in my stomach tightened, but it wasn't the worst part yet. While checking the rest of the house, I came across something that took my breath away. The bathroom door was ajar, and as I pushed it, I immediately stepped back. In the center of the room, nailed to a wooden board, was a dead cat. I recognized it, not mine, but the same stray cat that used to appear at my window during the nights. Now its body was there, fixed by rusty nails, with its paws extended in a position that seemed intentional, almost ritualistic. It took me a while to process what I was seeing. My eyes were locked on that animal, on the opaque and empty eyes that seemed to stare at me. It was then that I realized the meaning. This wasn't a simple theft. This was a warning, a direct message. They knew what I was doing, knew I was investigating, and were warning me that if I continued, something much worse awaited me. The fear that enveloped me at that moment didn't come as a shock or an impulse to flee. It was a slow, cold fear that infiltrated the depths of my mind as I tried to understand what I had just witnessed. It was no longer just paranoia. I was being watched, followed, and now they had made it clear they were willing to go to any lengths to stop me. Something in me refused to give in. I knew this case wasn't just about Amanda's disappearance. There was something much bigger, something dark hidden in the shadows. Even with increasingly direct warnings to stop, the feeling of being close to the truth kept me moving. But now I understood the game I was playing. It was dangerous. After the episode with the cat, everything began to change. First, it was my mind. I couldn't get out of my head what I had seen or what I had lost. My computer, notebooks, camera, all the investigation material gone. But the worst wasn't the loss itself, but the message. That was a warning, a threat that hung over me like a constant weight. The people who had emerged in my life, my new friends, began to act strangely. They tried to reassure me, insisted I was exaggerating, invited me to experiences that had never crossed my mind before: hiking, rappelling, activities to release adrenaline, and apparently make me forget everything. They insisted I should abandon the investigation and enjoy life. They always had smiles on their faces, but their looks, something about them deeply bothered me. It was as if they knew something I didn't. For a while, I tried to go with the flow, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything around me was wrong, out of place. And then the nightmares began. At first, they were just vague visions, an obscure, demonic presence standing at the foot of my bed. It observed me while I slept, motionless. I wanted to scream, wanted to move, but my body was trapped. I could do nothing but watch that thing approach closer and closer each night. Then it became more intense. That presence began to touch me. I don't know how to explain it without sounding completely insane, but it was a strange touch, intimate, almost seductive. I knew it was evil, but there was something uncontrollable in the way my body reacted, as if it was attracted to this dark energy against my will. The following nights were even worse. Amanda began to appear in my dreams, always naked, embracing that demonic figure, looking at me with a mixture of mockery and something terribly cold that froze my blood. They were together, and their eyes burned me. They both touched me, playing with me in a way that was at once horrible and inexplicably disturbing. I couldn't move, couldn't react. I just watched while they laughed and played with my impotence. I woke up every night soaked in sweat, with my heart beating so hard it seemed to want to escape from my chest. But dreams weren't my only torment. During the day, reality seemed to want to swallow me too. I began to hear sounds in the house, footsteps coming from empty rooms, muffled whispers in languages I couldn't identify. Sometimes I felt a presence behind me, and when I turned, there was no one there. And then there were the shadows, forms that moved in the corner of my eyes, but disappeared as soon as I tried to focus on them. The feeling of being watched was constant. The terror came not only from the nightmares, but from this persistent pursuit that seemed to infiltrate every aspect of my life. I wasn't just investigating something dangerous anymore. I was being hunted by it. Things began to take an even more disturbing turn when I noticed changes in my neighbors' behavior. People who previously barely greeted me now knocked on my door with absurd excuses, wanting to enter, spend time with me, talk about trivial matters that had no relevance whatsoever. There was something about them, something that made my skin crawl, as if they knew something I didn't. The feeling of discomfort intensified every time I encountered them. One day, while I was in the kitchen, I noticed two of them standing outside my window. They didn't say anything, just stood there observing me. When they realized I had seen them, they smiled and walked away calmly, as if it was completely normal. That's when I decided I couldn't continue sleeping in my house anymore. I didn't know if it was the place that was driving me crazy, or if I myself was losing control. But one thing was certain: I needed to get out of there. Any alternative would be better than continuing under that constant weight, with those unwanted visits and the dreams that consumed me night after night. I gathered a few things and left. I started sleeping in motels or at acquaintances' houses who weren't connected to this spiral of madness. But not even that relieved the sensation of terror. The fear was no longer limited to one place. It had taken root inside me, growing like roots, spreading each day. And even when I closed my eyes, I feared the return of that demonic presence, always bringing Amanda with it as a dark reminder that something was lurking in the shadows. It was during an ordinary afternoon, while I was trying to forget everything, that I received a message on Facebook. The name of the sender paralyzed me. It was Amanda's sister. I remained motionless for a few seconds, staring at the screen, already expecting something disturbing. And when I finally opened the message, I felt a chill traverse my body. She explained she was trying to contact old college colleagues to gather photos and videos of Amanda. She wanted to create a post to attract more help and attention to her sister's disappearance. The message was full of hope, saying that despite everything, she believed Amanda was still alive. But what really destabilized me was the final detail. Amanda's family hadn't received any direct news from her. Only one thing had arrived. The clothes she was wearing on the day she disappeared, accompanied by a ball of blue yarn, sent anonymously to her mother without explanations, without clues, without anything that could make sense of it. A ball of yarn, something so insignificant yet so loaded with a hidden and macabre message. Why would someone send that? What could it mean? This message brought to light something that fear had been trying to erase within me, a purpose. I remembered this wasn't just about the horrors I was facing, but about a real person. Amanda was at the center of everything, a young woman I knew who remained missing. Her family was still waiting, still searching for answers. How could I simply turn my back on that? The new friends, those strange figures who had emerged in my life, returned to my mind. I began to connect the dots. What if Amanda had gone through the same things I was experiencing? What if these friends had also surrounded her, leading her little by little into something dark? The sensation of being trapped was inevitable. They were always present, always watching, always guiding. And now I wondered, had Amanda been swallowed by the same abyss that was circling me? I decided to continue the investigation, but now with a more careful approach. My first step was to review again the social media of Amanda's acquaintances, searching for details that might have gone unnoticed. That's when one of her friends caught my attention. Someone discreet during college, who now presented himself on Facebook as a neurosurgeon. There were several photos of his office, and also of outdoor activities. Most of the images seemed to have been taken in the same place, a national park in the state of Washington. There were records of him hiking, camping, and even photos of his group of campers, who apparently gathered frequently. In some of these photos, I noticed something that immediately gave me chills. I recognized the faces of some of the people who now surrounded me, those who had suddenly become my friends. There they were, posing with the neurosurgeon as part of that group. If they were present in the images, there was a good chance they were also involved with Amanda. This connection deeply disturbed me. I couldn't ignore the feeling that they were all part of something bigger, a closed and threatening circle. I knew I needed to go to that national park. There was no other alternative. I was certain that place was the missing piece, and that group of campers knew much more than they let on. The thought that Amanda might be alive gave me strength to face the fear that grew each day. I decided to visit the neurosurgeon's office. He didn't give any direct clue, but something in the way he smiled and talked about outdoor activities left me uneasy. There was an excessive confidence, a relaxed manner that seemed to say, "You won't get anything." This attitude only increased my determination. I had to reach the park, whatever the cost. Surprisingly, gaining his trust was easier than I expected. As soon as I showed interest in his group and his adventures in the outdoors, his posture changed completely. The initial distance gave way to an almost forced camaraderie. He began to invite me to his meetings, and the first opportunity arose, a cycling route in the park they frequented. I knew participating would be risky, but I saw no other way to get closer to the truth. The more I got involved, the more strange details appeared. For example, he was married, but his wife and children never accompanied him in these activities. When he spoke about them, his posture was distant, almost as if they belonged to a parallel life that he abandoned whenever he was with the group. This wasn't exclusive to him. Other members of the group followed a similar pattern. They were all men of similar ages, with stories that seemed too alike, fragile, distant family ties, as if these relationships had no real importance. They claimed to have met through social networks, because of a common interest in nature and extreme sports. They called themselves brothers, as if they were a kind of chosen family. But there was something more, something they never openly said. One common detail stood out. Almost all had been raised by single mothers. They mentioned this casually, as if it were a coincidence without relevance, but it immediately caught my attention. The only exception was the neurosurgeon, who seemed to maintain a close relationship with his parents, something that stood out from the others. There was something behind this apparent coincidence, but I knew I couldn't press. If I wanted to discover what was really happening, I would need to be cautious. Each conversation, each interaction had to be calculated. The truth was there in that group, but reaching it would require patience and care. What disturbed me most was perceiving a disquieting pattern in the personal stories of the group members. Almost all had spent the last 5 years moving from city to city, living in different places, and according to them, meeting more friends. The carefree and almost cheerful tone with which they described this routine gave me chills. How was it possible that all had the same lifestyle, always on the move, forming new groups, disappearing, and then resurfacing with more stories and brothers? It was obvious this wasn't a coincidence. It was clear that this was the cult's method to recruit people. They used the pretext of love for nature and extreme sports as a facade to approach vulnerable individuals, people seeking a sense of belonging. And perhaps I was beginning to suspect they were doing the same with me. The more time I spent with them, the more evident it became that something was hidden beneath all that facade of adventure and camaraderie. I knew that participating in that cycling route was delving even deeper into their circle. But I also knew that if I wanted to find Amanda and understand what was really happening, I needed to move forward, even if it meant running the risk of falling into the same trap. The weekend started in an apparently normal way. We headed toward the national park as planned, with the bicycles in the back of the pickup truck, and the typical enthusiasm of a group going to enjoy nature. But from the beginning, small details bothered me. First, they carried few items for camping, just some backpacks, nothing that suggested real preparation for spending a night outdoors. Second, some bicycles seemed inadequate for the terrain we would face. They were urban models, clearly out of place there. What caught my attention most, however, was one of the neurosurgeon's friends, who was wearing a complete suit as if he was going to a business meeting, and not an adventure in the middle of the woods. These small deviations from normality only increased my suspicion. I decided not to comment on anything. I needed to maintain my disguise and act as just another member of the group. When we finally reached the destination, the place wasn't what I expected. Instead of following the marked trails of the national park, we deviated onto a side path without any signage or record on the maps I had consulted previously. This detour led us to an unexpected scenario, a huge site hidden in the middle of the forest. It wasn't in the national park, as they had made me believe, but on private property adjacent to it. The atmosphere of the place was disconcerting. At the site, I spotted a group of women. Something about them immediately seemed strange to me. It wasn't something I could clearly define, but the sensation they transmitted was unsettling. They didn't seem like guides or caretakers of the place, as I had initially presumed. They had a peculiar presence, as if they knew more than they let on. The feeling that something was very wrong only grew. Everything seemed carefully orchestrated, each detail suggesting there was more behind that trip than they were telling me. And at the same time, I knew I needed to continue playing the game. It was the only way to discover the truth. We were received as if they had known us for years. The women who took care of the site led us directly to chalets arranged in a circle near a clearing in the forest. The place was too tidy, too planned to be just a common camp. It was at that moment I realized this wasn't part of the national park. This site, this terrain wasn't on any of the official routes I had studied. The chalets were modern, well-equipped, almost too comfortable for the context. But what caught my attention most was the structure in the center of the terrain. Since we arrived, my eyes had gravitated toward it, unable to look away. It seemed like a ceremonial center. It was a peculiar construction made of large stones and dark wood, with intricate symbols engraved on its surface. I didn't recognize those designs, but I knew they weren't merely decorative. That was more than a meeting space for campers. It was something ancestral, loaded with a purpose I still couldn't decipher. One of the men in the group explained with rehearsed naturalness that the site was part of a private club of adventurers. He said the place was rented to exclusive groups who wished to disconnect from the world and reconnect with nature. But everything in that tone, in the careful choice of words, sounded false. I knew deep down that this place wasn't a refuge for adventurers. It was the meeting point of something much darker, a location the cult used for its own purposes. Throughout the weekend, my attention was divided between observing the others, analyzing the environment, and trying to understand the hidden intentions behind each gesture. The women who received us weren't just hostesses. There was something in the way they moved, and in the calculated way they smiled that left me uneasy. Everything seemed wrong with this place, and I knew something terrible had happened in that space. I just didn't know how or for how long, but I felt it. On Sunday afternoon, when I began to prepare for the worst, expecting to be invited to participate in some ritual or initiation ceremony, something unexpected happened. One of the women from the group approached. Her face conveyed tranquility, but her eyes said something else. There was something disturbing behind that calm expression. She told me she would take me back to the city, that I should take a bus and return home. The rest of the group would stay for what she called a private competition, but she insisted it would be better if I left. It didn't make sense after everything. After bringing me closer to the group, taking me to the site, they were dismissing me. For a moment, I was disconcerted. I had assumed I would be tested somehow, or that they would try to include me in something deeper. But instead, they were distancing me. Why? Just when it seemed I was about to discover something important, they were removing me from the place. With no acceptable alternatives, I agreed. While I packed my things, the woman helped me, but there was urgency in her gestures and voice, as if time was crucial. It was then that I began to piece things together. The neurosurgeon knew too much. He knew I had been asking about Amanda, that my presence there wasn't by chance. Perhaps they had realized my questions were becoming dangerous. Perhaps they had decided I was a problem. I didn't know exactly why they were sending me away, but something inside me said that if I stayed, the consequences could be even worse. As the pickup truck moved away from that place, the sight disappearing behind the trees, I felt a mixture of relief and frustration. I knew I was still far from understanding everything, but something about that weekend confirmed what I feared most. That place was the heart of the cult. The journey in the pickup truck was loaded with a suffocating tension. Outside the window, the night was falling, the tires grinding against the dirt road. I tried to organize my thoughts when the woman's voice broke the silence, low but full of urgency. I'm not going to take you to the city. I'll leave you in the middle of the way. Please come back with help. Amanda is in danger, and the others too. My body went rigid. The gravity in her voice prevented me from interrupting her. Amanda is alive, but I don't know for how long, she continued, accelerating a bit more. I could feel the growing panic in her, even as she kept her eyes fixed on the road. They won't stop, she said, and I won't be able to help them much longer. The cult is run by the neurosurgeon. The words resonated inside me like thunder. A shiver ran down my spine. They use us as vessels, she confessed, her voice beginning to falter, to bring back a demon they pray to. Over the last 8 years, they've sacrificed more than 12 babies and also their mothers. My mind was spinning, refusing to believe what she was saying. Each phrase seemed unreal, but her tone, her desperation was impossible to ignore. The neurosurgeon is the leader, she continued, almost whispering now. He chooses the women, prepares them, and then they're discarded. Amanda is alive, but I don't know for how long. And I fear I'll be next. When my time comes, no one will come for me. The strength in her voice began to disappear, replaced by pure terror. Her eyes were watery, the fear evident in every word. It was as if she had been holding a confession for months, waiting for the right moment to release the weight she carried. At that moment, one thing became clear to me. This wasn't just a mystery to solve. It wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was an abyss, a profound horror, and each minute I spent there pulled me deeper into it. She asked me to return with help. I should have, but instead I let ego and fantasies guide me. I wanted to be the hero, imagined myself as the protagonist of the films I so adored, the one who always arrives in time, who solves the case and saves the day. I thought I could do it alone. I returned on foot without telling anyone, driven by the arrogance that I could solve everything on my own. The site was silent when I approached that night. There was no moon, only the sound of leaves under my feet and the whisper of the wind through the trees. The calm of the place was almost more frightening than if there had been chaos. From a distance, I observed the cult members. There was something methodical in their movements, as if each gesture was part of a carefully rehearsed ritual. The women, dressed in blue tunics, walked barefoot toward an isolated cabin away from the rest of the site. It was evident that that building was the epicenter of everything that was about to happen. It was then that my heart raced. Among the figures moving in the dim light, I recognized Amanda. Even after all this time, I knew immediately it was her. I had to enter the cabin. As soon as I realized she was alone, I advanced with maximum care. I wasn't thinking about danger or consequences, only the chance to get her out of there. My heart was set on the idea of being the savior. It was like in the movies, where the hero arrives at the exact moment to prevent the worst. But life wasn't like the movies, and deep down I knew that. I entered. There was Amanda with the same face I remembered so well. But something was different. Her prominent belly froze me in place. She was pregnant, very pregnant. My mind was desperately trying to process what I was seeing, but nothing else mattered at that moment. All I wanted was to get her out of there. I approached with care, barely breathing. I whispered that I would help her, that I would take her away from that place, and that everything would be all right. For an instant, I thought I had succeeded. She looked into my eyes, and for a brief second, I saw something that seemed like hope. But then her expression changed. Her eyes became distant, cold, detached. Her lips curved into a smile that chilled me to the bone. "Michael," she said with a disturbing calm, "did you really think you were coming to save me?" The air around me became heavy, almost impossible to breathe. Only then did I realize what was happening. Amanda wasn't a victim. She was there because she wanted to be, completely convinced that her role in that horror was indispensable. "I'm going to bring the demon to life," she said, with a certainty that made my insides turn. "I am the chosen one, the neurosurgeon's favorite. This baby is the key to everything." Before I could react or understand the weight of her words, Amanda began to scream. Her scream cut through the night like a blade, calling everyone around her. "He's here! He's here! Michael! Get him!" My head was spinning. It had all been a trap, and I, like the fool I was, had fallen into it. There was no time to think or plan. In seconds, the site came to life. The cult members emerged from the shadows, moving with frightening precision in my direction. The sound of hurried footsteps came from all directions, and Amanda, with that satisfied smile, watched me as if she had already won. Now I was the prey, and the cult was the predator. Panic took hold of me, every cell in my body pulsing with adrenaline and despair. When all seemed lost, I saw the woman who had driven me to the site. She appeared like an apparition, her eyes full of fear but also urgency. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.